Please, run away from your husband immediately. Actually, 13 years ago I was shocked by the horrifying truth the doctor revealed. I had only brought my sick husband for a routine checkup today. Why was the doctor telling me this? My mind was in a state of panic. Listen, you might be in danger too. You should do something about it. The doctor's eyes conveyed that this was no joke, but the truth. I swallowed hard. I had felt sorry for my husband because of his illness, but now, a different feeling was emerging. Understood. Thank you for telling me. I needed to take some action, no matter what. My name is Jessica, I'm 53 years old. I've been working as a full-time employee at a fairly large pharmaceutical company for 30 years. Having worked at the same company for so long, my workplace feels as comfortable as home. There aren't many women my age who continue to work full-time, so I feel like everyone respects me. The reason I've been able to work full-time until this age is that I was single until 3 years ago. 3 years ago, Robert, the head of my department, jokingly teased me about not getting married. Looking back, it might seem like harassment, but I was old enough not to mind. Besides, Robert was my colleague, so we could share little jokes. Actually, the manager was also single, and we had deepened our bond as single comrades. However, at that time, there was a man with whom I was secretly getting along well. That man is now my husband, Richard. He is 5 years older than me, and it seems he was married once a long time ago but ended up divorcing. I met Richard through a marriage consultation service. Neither of us wanted children, and we were looking for someone to spend a leisurely life with for the rest of our lives. I decided to keep our relationship secret until we got married, so even when the manager teased me about marriage, I would gently respond. A few months later, I was able to marry him without any problems. Of course, we didn't have a grand party. I was somewhat let down by how easily I could achieve what had seemed like a dream marriage. Let's make the best of it. Yes, let's do that. He worked in a factory, and honestly, my annual income was higher. The first company he worked for after graduation was apparently this factory. I was raised in an institution and had a strong desire to become a self-reliant adult, so I didn't want to give up my position as a full-time employee at the pharmaceutical company. So, I decided to continue working at my current company even after getting married. I reported my marriage to the manager immediately after getting married. Robert congratulated me but seemed to have a complicated expression. Perhaps he felt lonely because I, his single comrade, had gotten married. When I teased him about it, "Stop talking nonsense!" he replied strongly, so I decided to leave it at that. I was excited about my new life with Richard. It had been a while since I felt this excited. Imagining a bright future. I never thought such a thing would await me in the future. Married life went smoothly. Even though I was married, my life didn't change much since I was still working. However, after buying a cheap, second-hand house in the countryside, our living area shifted to the countryside, and I started commuting by car instead of by train. The car was originally mine. Richard didn't have a car, so we started using my car together. About a year after getting married, a shadow began to fall over our smooth married life. Is it depression? Yes. Based on talking to Richard, it's clear he's at least in a state of depression. He had been acting strangely for a while. He would wake up in the morning with a gloomy face and leave more than half of his breakfast untouched. He seemed distracted, mixing up sugar and salt, wearing mismatched socks. I wondered if he was worried about something, but then he started making small mistakes daily and seemed to fail at work as well. He wasn't very talkative to begin with, but he became even more silent. I liked his not very talkative but solid personality, but it was different when he hardly spoke. Living together felt like living alone, which was lonely. From these minor changes, I realized he might have some mental illness, so I took Richard to the nearest psychiatrist. And then, the diagnosis I was told was depression. Of course, I had a vague idea of what depression was, so hearing that my husband had become depressed plunged my world into darkness. The best treatment for depression is to remove its cause. Do you have any idea what that might be? I don't know. He's been working at the same factory for decades, so it's hard to imagine he'd suddenly become depressed now. His department hasn't changed either. If anything, I feel like marrying me has been the biggest change. I see. But you haven't been doing anything at home to corner him, have you? We were living a happy life together. So I don't know what went wrong. Is that so? If anything happens, please come anytime. Let's think about the treatment together. Yes, thank you. After that, I visited this psychiatric clinic several times, but the cause of Richard's depression remained unclear, and his symptoms did not improve. Instead, they worsened day by day. On bad days, he would complain of a headache the moment he woke up, dive back into bed, and end up missing work for days. He hardly ate properly, so he quickly became thin and frail. He had to take a leave of absence from work, but it seemed unlikely he would return, so he eventually quit. I'm sorry to cause you trouble. No, it's fine. I actually like working, you know. Richard seemed to feel guilty about making me work all the time. I just wanted his condition to improve, and that was the only thing I hoped for as I went off to work. It was unbearable to see him in such a state. After he quit his job and stayed at home, I worried about him while I was at work. There was a time when he wandered off alone like a patient with dementia and didn't come back home. He said he couldn't remember where the house was. Perhaps he was suffering from both depression and dementia. My mental exhaustion kept piling up. Jessica, are you okay lately? Isn't his condition improving? It's still bad. I see. You should take some rest too. Yes. Here. I gratefully accepted the energy drink that he offered and drank it on the spot. I felt a little relieved. Thank you. No, we have to help each other out in times of trouble. Tears nearly spilled over from his kindness. I had been trying to support Richard, but it seemed stress had built up without me realizing it. I shouldn't overdo it. If I were to collapse, it would be a disaster for both of us. I had to stay strong. I reminded myself of this and continued to head to work every day. 2 years have passed since then. This year marks our 3rd wedding anniversary. Richard's condition continued to worsen, with no sign of recovery. One day, as I was about to leave for work, I noticed that the car, which should have been parked next to the entrance, was gone. I blinked several times, thinking it strange. Since he developed depressive symptoms, I was the only one driving the car. If the car was missing, it meant I had moved it, but I hadn't gone anywhere since coming back from work yesterday. Therefore, it was impossible for the car not to be in front of the house. Richard, do you know where the car went? I asked him in a panic. I think it was there when I came back yesterday. He replied indifferently. Yesterday, Richard had been out while I was at work, and he came back an hour after I returned from work. The doctor had recommended walking or jogging for a change of scenery, so Richard must have gone jogging yesterday. If Richard said the car was there when he came back, it means the car was taken sometime between last night and this morning. With a question hovering over my head, I ended up commuting to work using the bus and train for the day. Using a different mode of transport made me about 10 minutes late. After explaining the situation, he forgave me. That's unfortunate. Saying, I wonder what happened. Did he take it somewhere? No way. He said he saw the car yesterday. And he hasn't been driving since he got sick because it's dangerous. It seemed Robert suspected Richard knew something. But I knew how much his mood fluctuated and how many careless mistakes he made in daily life. So I couldn't imagine Richard doing anything with the car. After work that day, I filed a police report for the stolen car. I hoped the car would come back soon, but I was anxious that it might never. Other suspicious things happened as well. When I checked my bank account at the bank on payday, the balance was 0. We have a joint bank account, but at that time, I was looking at my personal bank account. When I checked the joint bank account, its balance was also 0. What's going on? Since Richard could access the joint bank account, it seemed like he must have done something. However, I hadn't told him anything about my personal bank account, and he shouldn't know the PIN. Yet, the fact that all the savings were gone made my skin crawl. When I got home, I immediately asked him, Richard, have you withdrawn any money from our bank accounts recently? What are you talking about? The balance is all gone. Do you know anything about it? He seemed very suspicious, but it wasn't good to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to put mental stress on a patient with depression. I don't know. You've been managing our finances, Jessica, and I haven't done anything. Richard answered while looking at the ceiling, his mind seemingly elsewhere. Sometimes Richard would space out like this. It must be the illness. Could Richard, in such a state, really withdraw the money? I decided to consult the police about this matter as well. To date, neither the stolen car nor the money has been found. Losing the car was shocking, but I was more panicked about being out of money. If I had parents to rely on in times like this, I might be able to borrow some money, but unfortunately, I was raised in an institution and have no parents. All I have is a husband who has developed depression. I was gradually becoming overwhelmed by panic and loneliness. I was advised to change Richard's hospital just yesterday. The psychiatric clinic we had been attending was a private practice and had limitations in treatment. The doctor wrote a referral, and we started going to a general hospital. When we went for our first regular checkup at the general hospital, we took the train to the nearest station and walked from there. It was almost my first time going to a general hospital, so I felt somewhat nervous. He continued to walk in silence as usual. I took a deep breath and passed through the doors of the hospital. I handed in the referral letter at the reception and waited for Richard's name to be called. Being a general hospital, there were a lot of patients waiting at the reception. It seemed like it would take a while, I thought absently. After about an hour, Richard's name was finally called. He went into the consultation room. I had been reading a book while waiting, but shortly after Richard was called in, a nurse called me. "Excuse me, are you Richard's wife?" "Yes." "The doctor would like to speak with you, could you come?" It was common for me to receive explanations about Richard's illness, so I followed the nurse, expecting it to be about that. I entered the room the nurse led me to, feeling nervous. "I'm sorry for calling you suddenly. Please, have a seat." The doctor seemed very polite, which was my first impression. He appeared to be about 10 years older than me, with gray hair and a beard. He looked like a kind person. "Is this about my husband's condition?" I asked the doctor. Then, the doctor nodded significantly. I braced myself for the doctor's next words, wondering if the condition was severely bad. "I'm going to be straightforward, and this might upset you, but..." "What?" I tensed up, wondering what he would say. "Please, run away from him immediately. Actually, he was arrested for fraud 13 years ago." "Excuse me?" I was shocked by the horrifying truth the doctor revealed. I had only brought my sick husband for a routine checkup today. Why was the doctor telling me this? My mind was already in a state of panic. While conducting his regular checkup, I thought I recognized his face. And some of his answers during the consultation made me doubt if he really has depression. I've been a psychiatrist for about 10 years, and in that time, I've seen many emotions. He is not depressed. I thought he might be pretending to be depressed. And then I remembered. I had seen him before, treated him before. The doctor's doubts about my husband accelerated my heartbeat. I used to be a surgeon until 10 years ago. About 13 years ago, a patient was brought in with a deep cut on his right leg, and I was the one who treated him. Seeing the large scar on his leg today and then looking at his face, I realized he was the patient I had treated before. Is that so? Indeed, there is a large scar on Richard's right leg. I had never asked about it, and he never brought it up himself. Meeting the doctor who treated him today was a coincidence, but such coincidences are not impossible. He had gotten injured during an argument with his wife at the time. Later, I found out that the argument was because he had defrauded his ex-wife. Apparently, he stole her branded goods and money. The worst part is, he lied about having dementia. Dementia! Just like now. Pretending to be sick to let his wife off guard and then committing fraud. It's the worst kind of act. Faced with such a shocking confession, I didn't know what to say. That Richard had a criminal record and had been arrested before. And his method was something I could relate to. If I had parents, maybe they would have looked into his background, but I was just thrilled to have found a marriage partner at my age. So, I never thought to check his background. Listen, you might be in danger too. You should take some action. The doctor looked at me straight. This couldn't be a joke. I had been deceived by him. Knowing this, I couldn't sit still. Understood. Thank you for telling me. I needed to do something, anything. Walking beside Richard as we left the consultation room, I was desperately thinking of a plan. Then, I decided to install cameras all over the house to record his movements while I was away. The cameras were very small, and I was confident Richard would never notice them. I deliberately placed some overseas brand bags and watches I had bought a long time ago in conspicuous places to see what would happen. A week later, calculating the time when the bags and watches went missing, I checked the camera recordings and saw Richard stealing them and leaving the house. Returning home about 2 hours later, he took out money from an envelope and smiled suspiciously. It was a look not befitting a patient with depression, making me certain Richard had stolen my car and savings. So, it was him. I was filled with disbelief, but the evidence before me was indisputable. He had lied and deceived me. He took money and valuable items from me, pretending to be sick as if nothing had happened. Unforgivable. What was the point of all my hard work and caring for him? At this point, merely divorcing him wasn't enough for me. Of course, separation was inevitable, but I wanted to make him reflect on his actions. He had deceived me and repaid my goodwill with malice. I wanted him to apologize. With tears nearly forming, I prepared the divorce papers and filled out the necessary sections. The next day, I told him I was going to work as usual and headed to the police station. I had applied for leave from work the day before, but they accepted my application for the next day due to the emergency. My husband has been stealing money from me, I told the police, showing them the recorded footage. The police said it was difficult to judge just from the recording, so they checked with the store where my husband might have sold the stolen goods. Then, looking for my missing car, they found it had been sold secondhand. It was confirmed that he withdrew the deposits from my account, and his depression was also a lie. As Richard's web of lies unraveled, I felt a mix of relief and sadness, overwhelmed by indescribable emotions. He has a prior record. We'll head to your house immediately. Yes, please do. The developments that followed could be described as a whirlwind. I went back home with the police officer. It was just after 3 p.m. I'm home. Returning in the middle of the day, when I was supposed to be at work. Huh? Richard exclaimed. His eyes widened as he saw the police officer following me. What's this about? Richard, let's get divorced. I presented the divorce papers I had kept in my bag. Ignoring the divorce papers, Richard looked at the police. You are under arrest for fraud. The officer approached Richard. Richard stepped back. What's this about? Shouting. Richard, you've been lying to me, haven't you? You weren't really suffering from depression, were you? What are you talking about? I've been diagnosed with depression and have been visiting the hospital for 2 years. It's hard to prove or disprove mental conditions like depression. But the doctor at the new hospital we visited recently told me you once pretended to have dementia to deceive your wife. He said he had treated you for an injury and doubted if you were really a patient with depression based on your responses. That's nonsense. I am a genuine patient with depression. It's terrible that you're suddenly leaving me. Richard, unfazed by the police presence, seemed adept at making excuses, likely accustomed to deceiving people. Having had run-ins with the law before, he wasn't easily shaken. Where's the evidence that I committed fraud? The evidence is right here. I showed the video of Richard exchanging my belongings for money. Why? Recording like that is a crime. He screamed, trembling. Asking for evidence in front of the police was beyond common sense. The arrest was being made because the evidence was already compiled. In that sense, his plan was weak. Look, you've been deceiving me for 3 years, stealing my car and money, and even trampling over my goodwill. It's outrageous to blame me and act as if your crimes didn't exist. Don't you have any common sense? But it's your fault for being deceived. If you hadn't been so gullible, none of this would have happened. You stupid! After everything I had done for him, Richard repaid my kindness with contempt and insulted me, snapping the last of my patience. Who do you think I've been working so hard for? I just wanted you to get better, and that's why I tried my best. And you think you can treat me terribly and get away with it? I never want to speak to you again. I'll consult with a lawyer, and of course, I'll demand compensation. Just go to the police already. You're the worst. My assertive, low voice surprised even the police officer, making it understandable that Richard would collapse on the spot. The police handcuffed him without hesitation. Finally giving up, Richard sighed in resignation and hung his head. The police escorted the resigned Richard away. I watched as if it was happening to someone else. Since the doctor advised me to escape from him, it all felt surreal. Even as I watched him being taken away by the police, it seemed like I was still in a dream. Now, I suppose I'll be returning to my life before marriage. It's true I felt relieved not to end up as Richard's servant for life, but there was also a sense of loneliness. Having finally entered into marriage after turning 50, the thought of being alone again filled me with despair. 2 weeks later, I formally divorced Richard. His arrest delayed the process a bit, but by the time the divorce was finalized, my mind had cooled down, and I was able to calmly accept everything that had happened to Richard and me. It's still uncertain what his sentence will be, but given it's his second offense, the penalty is likely to be heavier than usual. I just hope he learns from this and doesn't repeat the same mistakes. It seems marriage was just an illusion for me. Sighing heavily at lunchtime at work while eating the lunch I bought, Robert came and sat next to me, starting his meal as well. Is that so? I think you'd be fine with me. His comment was so casually made that I almost missed it. Do you think so? Replying. But as I realized what he meant, I felt my ears heat up embarrassingly. Are you serious? I'm always serious. Robert said it so smoothly. I was left speechless and stopped eating. Well, just think about it. Having finished his meal, Robert briskly went back to work. Left stunned, I continued eating. I had never considered a relationship with Robert. Yet, I knew he always cared for me. He's reliable and earns a good income. Though it hadn't crossed my mind, perhaps he is the best marriage partner. Wrapped in these admittedly rude thoughts, I felt a warmth inside. After work, maybe I'll invite him out for a meal. It might be a good place to start again. It was one of those days when the overcast sky seemed to reflect my unsettled heart. I received a call from the police on my mobile phone. Yes, this is Mia. What? The news was grim. My husband Richard had been in a traffic accident and was rushed to the hospital, unconscious. I was at my part-time job, so I asked for permission to leave early and headed straight to the hospital. The drive there was nerve-wracking. Being rushed to the hospital was no small matter. My hands trembled uncontrollably, and I could feel my heart pounding louder and louder. Upon arrival, a relatively young-looking doctor briefed me. He said Richard's life wasn't in danger, but he had suffered a severe head injury and there might be lasting effects. A few minutes later, my daughter-in-law Lily and grandson Paul arrived. Lily was carrying a traveling bag in one hand and holding Paul's hand with the other. However, once in the hospital room, Paul unusually started to fuss. Mom, I'm thirsty. What? But I don't have any drinks with me. Then buy me something. As Lily went to buy a drink, Paul slowly pulled an envelope out of his pocket. Grandpa gave me a letter to read. He said to read it in secret. For me? I opened it curiously to find a folded piece of stationery. Reading the words written in Richard's handwriting, I couldn't understand its meaning. However, it was clear he was trying to communicate something. Clutching onto a sliver of hope, I instinctively reached for Richard's wallet. I had to check its contents before Lily returned, my hands almost slipping in haste. Carefully yet swiftly, I opened his long wallet. My name is Mia. I'm a part-time working housewife, working about 5 days a week. Having been at the same job for about 7 years, I guess you could say I'm somewhat of a veteran there. The decision to start working part-time came after discussions about my husband's retirement. Richard, a teacher, had the option to retire at 65 or continue working as a part-time lecturer. If I become part-time, our income will decrease. We need to think about our retirement.
Right. We should try to save a bit more. After that conversation, I started working at a nearby supermarket. By then, our son Christopher had already found a job, leaving just the two of us at home. After graduating, Christopher immediately began working for a company and started living alone in an apartment near the downtown area. I worried about whether he was doing all right, but he was already a responsible adult. I realized there was no need for undue concern. One day, I got a call from Christopher. "Hello, Mom? I've got someone I want you to meet." Both Richard and I were surprised by this news. The woman Christopher brought home was very cheerful and left a good impression.
Nice to meet you. I'm Lily.
Her smile was so bright, she could be mistaken for a celebrity, and she blushed as she made eye contact with Christopher. She was introduced to him by a coworker at his company, and they hit it off the day they met.
I just knew she was the one the moment I met her. Come on, how many times are you going to say that?
Watching the happy couple made us feel joyous too. We thought they could overcome anything that came their way. Richard and I celebrated their union. When it came time to decide where they would live after their wedding, Christopher said something unexpected. Actually, I was hoping we could live at home.
Don't you want to rent a place of your own?
Yeah, but Lily thought it would be nice to have support nearby, especially if she got pregnant. Lily had lost her own parents in an accident and had no one else to rely on. Indeed, pregnancy and childbirth can be daunting. Even someone as upbeat as Lily might have her own concerns.
Understood. We'll make the spare room available for you. Thanks, Mom.
With that, it became official that I'd take on the role of mother-in-law in a more meaningful way. I was worried about whether we'd get along, but Richard didn't seem concerned at all. Well, once the baby arrives, Christopher will probably find a new place and move out, he said nonchalantly, sipping his coffee and returning to his novel.
I hope so.
I shrugged in response. A few months into their stay, we learned Lily was pregnant, and we all rejoiced. Despite her morning sickness and emotional ups and downs, I was there for her throughout the pregnancy. The following year, Lily gave birth to a healthy boy. As a grandmother, I was overjoyed and moved by his arrival. They named him Paul.
That's a good name.
Richard smiled every day, watching his grandson, almost too busy to read his novels. For a while, I couldn't settle down either. Lily, still new to parenting, frequently asked for help. She needed help with diapers, feeding, and night cries, especially when Paul got sick. Lily, you're a mom now. You've got to manage on your own without relying on me. But I'm just unsure if I'm doing it right. You're doing great. Don't worry. Despite my encouragement, Lily had a hard time believing in herself. In the end, supporting Lily's parenting took longer than expected. As a result, I had to take more time off from my part-time job, eventually reducing my shifts to 3 days a week. A year after Paul was born, Lily seemed confident enough to manage on her own.
Mia, I can do it. I can manage by myself now.
She said this with a smile, which became more frequent. Her smile deeply reassured me. Seasons changed a few times, and 4 years had passed. Before we knew it, both Richard and I had turned 60, and we even took photos to celebrate the occasion, which feels like just yesterday. Richard retired and started working as a part-time lecturer at the same school. Christopher seemed busy, always muttering something as he faced his laptop day after day. Peeking over, I saw complex pie charts and spreadsheets filled with numbers. Don't overdo it, okay? Why not take a break and play with Paul?
Yeah, I will once I finish this.
He replied, somewhat distractedly, before returning his gaze to the screen. I sighed inwardly at this. Meanwhile, I found the right time to go back to working part-time 5 days a week. Going back to work as before, I felt like I could relax a bit more. Christopher and Lily didn't express any desires to move out. Lily didn't resume working and dedicated herself to household chores and childcare. Since Christopher was earning, they didn't seem to worry about living expenses. However, I was surprised when she asked to contribute a little to the living expenses. "Please, Mia. I'll continue to take care of the household and childcare as before. Isn't Christopher's income enough? We want to save for the kids' education and extracurricular activities in the future." But before I could say more, Richard chimed in. "Why not? Education costs a lot these days for kids." His perspective, coming from someone in education, held some weight. It's a wise decision on her part. See, Richard agrees with me. It seemed she took Richard's approval as a green light. Reluctantly, I agreed to arrange for some living expenses. Paul started preschool, and it's been 2 weeks since his enrollment. The daily struggle of getting him to wear his shoes and stop crying had become routine, but Lily seemed to be having a hard time with him. "Come on, Paul. The bus is going to leave." "No, no, no. I want to play with Grandpa." "Grandpa has work today. He's not at home." "No. Paul, your teachers and toys at preschool are waiting for you." Lily and I used all kinds of tricks to cheer him up. That's how they would leave every day. But something bothered me. Sometimes Lily didn't come back home after dropping off Paul. The walk to the bus stop was only about 5 minutes, not far at all. Worried she might have gotten into trouble, I tried calling her, but there were times when my calls went unanswered. On such days, she would return home with Paul as if nothing happened, right on time. "Hey, where did you go during the day, Lily?" When I asked, she hesitated slightly before responding. "Oh, just running errands, shopping for household items, clothes, you know." "Seems like you were gone for quite some time though." "Just taking a little break." "Mom, let her have her breaks." Christopher intervened, perhaps feeling sorry for her. Indeed, a little break is necessary for someone balancing household and childcare duties. "Right. I'm sorry for sounding accusing." No one thought to distrust her for taking time off during the day. In fact, it was recognized as something she needed. However, my concerns about her weren't limited to just that. One evening, as I was relaxing in the living room, Lily came over to me. "Mia, I have a favor to ask." "What is it? You seem very formal." "I was wondering if we could increase the living expenses a bit more." I couldn't believe my ears. "Is the current amount not enough?" "Well, you know, with Paul going to preschool and me making friends with other moms, I get invited to lunch." Lily answered, visibly flustered. "Can't you manage those outings with the money you already have?" "With prices going up and they disappear just buying Paul's diapers." Indeed, I had noticed the rising costs lately. I reluctantly agreed to increase the living expenses slightly. But that wasn't the end of the money requests. She kept finding reasons to ask for more. "What are you spending all that money on?" "Well, I've been shopping online." She admitted to using Christopher's laptop for online shopping, buying things impulsively to relieve stress. I suggested finding other ways to deal with stress, which she agreed to at the time. But within a few days, she was asking for money again. This cycle repeated, and I grew tired of it. "Lily, you need to think more carefully about how you're using money." "That's not it." "Then maybe you should consider taking up a part-time job." "We can't keep this up." After I said this, Lily left the room with a sad, resigned look. After that day, the persistent requests for more living expenses stopped. Instead, I noticed something strange about Richard. He stopped reading his books and spent time in his room on the computer, doing something he wouldn't talk about. It's just school stuff. I'd rather not have it seen. So, how about we go out somewhere this weekend? I've got plans this weekend, sorry. He would then retreat to his room. This behavior was new. He never used to bring work home before. Lately, he also seemed distant from Lily, avoiding her in the house. But then again, I've also caught them whispering in the hallway. Something's definitely off. Feeling uneasy, I discreetly hired a detective to investigate Richard. I hoped there was nothing wrong under our roof. After a few anxious days, fortunately, the investigation revealed nothing suspicious. There was nothing suspicious about them. Whatever I was feeling, it seemed unfounded. Was it all in my head? With these thoughts, I continued my routine, going to the part-time job and back home. It was on a cloudy day, mirroring my unsettled heart, that I received a call from the police. Yes, this is Mia. Yes, Richard is my husband. What? The officer spoke in a calm yet slightly excited tone. He informed me that Richard had been in a traffic accident, unconscious, and rushed to the hospital. I was so shocked that I could hardly comprehend the rest of the conversation. The background noise suggested it was a serious accident. Okay, I understand. Yes, I'll be right there. Goodbye. I rushed to explain the situation to my manager and got permission to leave for the hospital. The drive to the hospital was agonizing. An emergency transport is never a minor matter. I felt a cold sweat on my back, my limbs wouldn't stop shaking, and my heart pounded louder and louder. Upon arrival, a relatively young-looking doctor briefed me. He mentioned a contusion on his left shoulder, but no life-threatening injuries. However, Richard had sustained a severe head injury, and there might be lasting effects. I was told he would need to stay in the hospital for a while, and I handled the admission procedures. I wonder if it would be faster to have Lily bring things like a change of clothes and a toothbrush. With that thought, I hurriedly called Lily, asking her to bring the necessary items. After a few rings, Lily answered the phone. Hello, Lily? Richard has actually... What? I can't hear you very well. Lily seemed to be outside. I could hear the noise of people and passing cars in the background. And for some reason, she sounded rushed in her conversation. Richard's been in a traffic accident and has been hospitalized. I raised my voice to a level that wouldn't disturb those around me. What? Hospitalized? That's terrible. So, I need you to bring a hospital set. Got it. I hung up, puzzled by Lily's emotionless response. A few minutes later, Lily and Paul arrived. Lily was carrying a traveling bag in one hand and holding Paul's hand with the other, both in sandals. I had finished all the paperwork, so I went to meet them. Grandpa's sleeping. Tell him to get well soon. Get well! Paul twirled his finger and said so in his lisping voice. I watched, hoping Richard could hear him. Then, unexpectedly, Paul said, Mom, I'm thirsty. What? But I didn't bring any drinks with me. Then buy me something. Wait till we get home. But, unusually, Paul started fussing about being thirsty. All right. Stay here with Grandma. I'm sorry, I'll go to the vending machine. Lily left as if admitting defeat. Grandma, look. Paul turned his pants pockets inside out and took something out. Grandpa gave me a letter for you to read. He said to read it in secret. For me? It was an envelope, unsealed. Curious, I took out the folded stationery inside. Written in Richard's handwriting was, "Lily dangerous, evidence in wallet." I tried to calm my racing heart, unsure of its meaning. But it was clear he was trying to communicate something. Could it mean there was evidence in his wallet?
Wallet?
We usually don't look through or show each other our wallets. Yet, there might be a clue here. Holding on to a sliver of hope, I instinctively reached for Richard's wallet. As I thought about checking its contents before Lily returned, my hands almost slipped in haste. Carefully, yet quickly, I opened his long wallet. Inside, there were some cash, receipts, a debit card, and, hidden among them, an SD card.
Could this be what he meant?
I picked up the SD card between my thumb and forefinger, lifting it to eye level. Just then, I heard Lily's footsteps returning. I quickly stashed the SD card in my jacket pocket and put Richard's wallet back. "Is this okay?"
I don't want it anymore.
"What?" "But..." "Never mind that, let's go home. Christopher will be back soon." While soothing a disappointed Lily, we left the hospital room. That night, when the whole family was asleep, I turned on Richard's computer. I inserted the SD card to see what was on it. What could it be? Photos, videos, and some Word documents appeared on the screen. Photos? Videos? Richard wasn't the type to carry a camera or shoot videos. So, having photos and videos stored like this was unusual. Without hesitation, I clicked on them. To my shock, they were evidence of Lily's affair. I gasped and covered my mouth. Then, I opened the Word documents. I thought they might be Richard's diary, but they were different. They were Richard's own investigation into the affair, written like a diary. What on earth? I read through the documents, forgetting about the time. But I knew this needed to be resolved quickly. Later, I called Christopher and told him we needed to talk about Lily.
"What's up, Mom? What about Lily?"
He sat at the living room table, looking puzzled. I showed him the evidence Richard had given me and explained everything. Christopher was shocked and immediately called Lily. She came, looking sleepy after putting Paul to bed.
"Lily, don't you have something to say to Christopher and me?" "What?"
I laid out the photos and printed copies of Richard's diary on the table. This is the evidence.
"You've been having an affair, haven't you?"
The photos showed Lily intimately walking and chatting with a man who wasn't Christopher. What is this?
Pretending won't help. These photos were taken by a detective Richard hired.
I spread them out one by one on the table.
And these are photos taken by Richard.
They were from a day when he unusually said he had errands and didn't go out with me. That day, Richard had been following Lily.
I know who the other man is too. Richard figured it out.
No way.
The delivery guy who comes here often. You were doing all that online shopping just to see him. What a surprise. It's not what it looks like, Christopher, listen. It's not like that.
Lily's voice trembled. Under the living room light, her face turned pale, desperately denying the affair. I've been perfect with the housework and childcare. I wouldn't do something like that. But I didn't believe her words. With all the evidence laid out, she was still trying to hide the truth.
Lily, where were you when Richard had the accident? I was out shopping. Is that all? What are you implying? I'm starting to think you might have caused Richard's accident.
She paused for a moment, but then spoke up.
On what basis would you say that? I've read Richard's diary. You were confronted by Richard about the affair, weren't you? What? And at that time, you admitted to it. Not only that, but you also promised to stop if it was kept a secret from the family.
Lily's eyes shifted. I continued to press on. But your relationship with that man wasn't over. That's why Richard saw you meeting him at the cafe on the day he followed you.
No, that was...
Richard overheard you saying you resented him. You were planning revenge, weren't you? Well. So, Richard felt his life was in danger, leaving behind photos, videos, and a diary.
Christopher nodded in understanding.
Dad saved those on an SD card and hid it in his wallet in case something happened to him. In his wallet? The letter Paul gave me revealed it.
That short letter given in the hospital room. Without it, I might not have discovered these proofs.
Richard knew you were wary of him but counted on you overlooking Paul. That kid! So, he entrusted Paul with the letter to give it to me if anything happened.
I methodically continued, exposing Lily's actions. And that day, Richard had an accident because of you. No, it's not true.
When I called you, Lily, you were still outside, sounding more rushed and different than usual.
That doesn't mean...
Was it right after you caused Richard's accident?
She looked down with her shoulders shaking, and then whispered. I didn't think it would go that far.
What?
I just wanted to scare him a little. I pushed him from behind while he was waiting at a traffic light.
That's outrageous!
I thought no cars would come by there, like always. Then, by chance, a car came, and Richard.
How could you do that? Dad could have been.
Christopher lunged at Lily.
It's not my fault. Richard is to blame for getting in the way.
Lily raised her voice in defiance, insisting on her innocence. That argument won't hold.
It's clearly your fault. It's not me. I'm not the bad one. A little affair shouldn't matter.
How can you say that with Paul around? I still want to be seen as a woman.
I can't stand this anymore. I'm calling the police.
Christopher took out his mobile phone to call the authorities.
I'll testify that Lily caused Dad's accident. Stop, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
For the first time, Lily voiced an apology, crying out. But it was too late for Christopher and I to forgive her. Christopher reported the entire situation to the police over the phone. The next day, we went to the police station with Lily. The police were surprised by the rapid development of the case. Lily, Christopher, and I were interrogated. I submitted all the evidence Richard had collected, but more decisive proof emerged. It was a surveillance camera from a grocery store near the accident scene. The footage showed Lily pushing Richard, becoming irrefutable evidence. Lily was arrested, and Christopher served her with divorce papers. Lily protested, but Christopher was firm in his decision.
What about Paul?
We'll take care of Paul. And we'll also demand compensation from you and your affair partner in the divorce proceedings. Please, have mercy. Without looking back at her, Christopher stated this matter and returned home. Christopher was granted custody of Paul. As for the man Lily had an affair with, he stopped making deliveries to our place. I thought maybe his delivery area had changed, but that wasn't the case. According to his successor, the previous delivery man had suddenly quit his job. Perhaps he left because he wanted nothing more to do with Lily. But he did that to himself. A few days after the accident, Richard woke up, and we were informed. On my day off from part-time work, I visited Richard. Despite the visible cuts and bruises, he smiled when he saw me. My left shoulder still hurts. What about any lasting effects?
They did tests, and it seems there are no lasting effects. But I'll need rehabilitation.
I'm so relieved. It's a miracle.
You're exaggerating.
After being discharged,
Richard heard about Lily from me and Christopher and was disheartened. So it came to that. I'm sorry for keeping it from you guys. He apologized to us. Since then, Richard became somewhat withdrawn. He praised and doted on Paul, who had kept his promise, but otherwise seemed distracted. He probably felt guilty for driving Lily to desperation. It's unfair, he did nothing wrong. However, his former students reached out to him. They would stop by our house after school to chat with Richard and then leave. It was clear how much they admired him, even without any upcoming exams. This support must have been a great comfort to him. Gradually, Richard regained his energy and returned to teaching. While I continued my part-time job, Christopher and I took Paul to preschool. With a school play coming up, we planned to attend as a whole family. I wish for nothing but health and happiness for our family. I'm Jessica, a 38-year-old office worker. I have been married to my husband, Brandon, for 5 years now. However, we've been struggling to have children. Being the eldest and only son, Brandon has always been under pressure from his mother, Chloe, to have a boy since we got married. These days, few people care about the gender of their children, and either a son or daughter can be an heir. Brandon himself doesn't care about the gender and says there's no rush to have children. But Chloe sees me as an adversary and always tells me when Brandon's not around. A woman who can't have children is useless in this family. If you can't have one, you might as well leave. Her words have hurt me deeply. I'm sorry, Chloe, but honestly, your words are very pressuring. I wish you wouldn't say such things. I finally gathered the courage to express my feeling to Chloe. But she didn't understand it at all and became even more oppressive, telling me not to defy her. I was shocked. I never expected such words from her. At first, I endured it because she's Brandon's mother and I didn't want to cause any trouble. But enduring Chloe's sarcasm while undergoing fertility treatments was mentally taxing, and my health started to decline. Realizing I couldn't hide it anymore, I confided in Brandon. Furious, Brandon sternly warned Chloe, which stopped her surprise visits to our apartment for a while, but she continued to hurl insults daily through WhatsApp. Then one day, I found out I was pregnant at the fertility clinic. The first sight of the fetal ultrasound filled me with indescribable emotions. When I showed Brandon the ultrasound at home, we both cried tears of joy. But our happiness was short-lived as I remembered a significant problem. Chloe. Telling her about the pregnancy would surely lead to her frequent visits, insisting that pregnancy isn't an illness, telling me to move around, or bragging about her own experiences. The doctor advised me not to overexert myself until a heartbeat is confirmed, so I was torn about what to do. After discussing with Brandon, we decided I should stay at my parents' house for a while. If I'm at my parents' house, even if I'm not feeling well, my parents are there, and Chloe won't make a surprise visit to my parents' house. It's close to my workplace and Chloe wouldn't barge in there. I called my mother right away, explaining about the pregnancy in Chloe, and decided to return home for a while. Brandon drove me to my parents' house, where they were overjoyed about my pregnancy. After greeting my parents, Brandon returned to our apartment. Being back at my parents' house, away from Chloe, brought me peace of mind. Soon after, morning sickness hit, and I spent days in bed. At work, my pale face raised concerns, and my boss suggested me to take a break, which I gratefully accepted. Many women at my job, including those who have undergone fertility treatments, understood my situation. Their support was comforting. Other than severe morning sickness, my pregnancy was uneventful, and the baby grew healthily. Feeling the first kicks was indescribably touching, and I lovingly caressed my belly every day. In fact, Brandon and I had already planned to move to a bigger house once we had a child. The reason is, our apartment was getting old, and while it's fine for just the two of us, it felt inconvenient for raising a child. We had set various criteria like proximity to stations, hospitals, and shopping facilities, and were searching accordingly. Then, Brandon suddenly sent me a photo. It was of a new high-rise condominium near the station. The area around the condo had everything needed for living, like commercial facilities and hospitals, and it was close to nurseries and schools, making it convenient for kids in the future. Completion is expected next month, and I casually entered a lottery for it. Surprisingly, we won. If you don't like it, we can just transfer it to someone else. Jessica, you can see it and decide. Hearing this, I immediately opened their website, was taken aback by the stylish design of the rooms, and exclaimed, "What?" The latest system kitchen, a bathroom with a sauna. Moreover, the unit we won was on the top floor of the 30-story building. The view from the window was amazing. I was a bit hesitant about the price, but Brandon works at a top-tier company, and with our salaries, we could afford it, so I decided to sign the contract for this condominium. Of course, I couldn't keep the purchase of a new high-rise condominium from my in-laws. I talked about it through Austin, my father-in-law. Austin said, "It's impressive that you young ones bought a condominium. If you need anything, I'm here to help." However, Chloe was not happy about this. When she found out we bought a high-rise condo, she was upset that we weren't living with her. Then, an incident happened. A week after moving in, Chloe suddenly visited. As usual, she went around the room complaining, but I entertained her with a smile. Then, suddenly, Chloe said she dropped her keys near the emergency stairs. "What? Why did you drop your keys by the emergency stairs? Don't tell me you climbed all the way up here?" I said, but apparently, she had dropped them while checking where the emergency stairs were, just in case. I went to the emergency stairs instead of Chloe to get the keys. At that moment, "I'm taking this house." I was suddenly pushed from behind, lost my balance, and fell down the stairs. "Ouch! Help, somebody!" Unable to stand due to pain and shock, I suddenly felt warm water flowing around my feet. Realizing I had probably broken my water, I thought about calling an ambulance, but since I had hit my head hard, I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Brandon was there, looking worriedly at me. "Jessica, are you okay?" Brandon asked, visibly shaken, as I woke up. "Where am I? What happened to me?" I was still confused from just waking up and had a fuzzy consciousness from the head injury. When I touched my stomach, I felt something was off. My stomach, which was big until recently, had shrunk. Realizing this, I felt the blood drain from my face. "Hey, why is my stomach like this? Where's my baby? Where did my baby go?" I asked Brandon. Then Brandon quietly began to speak. "The baby in your belly is..." The moment I heard those words, I couldn't stop my tears and began crying out loud in the hospital room. Someone on the same floor found me, noticing the emergency staircase door left open. When they went to close it, they found me collapsed and hurriedly called an ambulance. Brandon asked why I approached the emergency stairs, so I explained everything about my interaction with Chloe. I was mentally harassed by Chloe when Brandon wasn't around before, which had once caused me to fall ill. Because of that, Brandon instructed me to always carry a voice recorder. Of course, I started recording the moment Chloe showed up unannounced. After listening to the voice recorder, it was clear that Chloe was the culprit. Brandon was furious to learn that his own mother had done such a thing. Then, a call came in on Brandon's mobile phone from a relative. On the call, Brandon heard a shocking fact. It seemed Chloe, thinking the baby had died, was telling relatives while crying, "Oh, my poor sweet grandchild has gone to heaven. It's so sad. It's because Jessica, even though she's pregnant, went out riding a bicycle." She was making up absurd stories. However, Austin, who was present, had heard nothing like that from either me or Brandon and was looking at Chloe in utter disbelief. It seemed impossible that Austin didn't know anything about it. And the idea of a woman in her 9th month of pregnancy riding a bicycle. That's why the relative called Brandon. It was unbelievable. Then Brandon, taking the voice recorder, said, "Jessica, let me borrow this for a bit. Can you leave the rest to me? He then left the hospital room. As Brandon left, my parents arrived. After I explained everything, they were both shocked and angry. I decided to trust Brandon and wait in the hospital room for the outcome. Meanwhile, Brandon met with the relative who had called him. It turned out Chloe was gathering relatives at her house, explaining the incident. Of course, her words were nonsense, and she was just trying to make herself look innocent. Some relatives believed Chloe and wept, while others were skeptical and viewed her with suspicion. Suddenly, Brandon burst in, causing Chloe to look at him in surprise. Huh? Brandon, why are you here? You were supposed to be with Jessica. She needs you. It's so sad about the baby. I was looking forward to its birth. Chloe said, even feigning tears. At that moment, something snapped in Brandon. Enough, Mom. I know everything. You pushed Jessica down the emergency stairs, he said, pulling out the voice recorder in front of the relatives. Everyone was shocked to hear the conversation recorded so vividly. Who heard the voice could not hide their surprise. Is this true? Austin, whose face turned pale due to the shock, asked Chloe. No, that's not true. This is nonsense. I didn't go near the emergency stairs. Even after hearing the recording, Chloe insisted she hadn't done it. However, there was a security camera nearby, and its footage would surely show me and Chloe entering the emergency stairwell. When Brandon mentioned this, Chloe, who had been speaking fluently until then, turned pale and began to tremble. How awful! We're family, aren't we? How dare you shame your own mother like this? Chloe clung to Brandon, insisting she was innocent and that it was Jessica who had slipped on her own. Even if that were true, leaving someone who had fallen and not helping them is questionable. However, the relatives who had already heard the voice recording did not believe Chloe's story. Instead, they urged her to go to the police and turn herself in. It's not me. I'm not the bad one. You understand, don't you? You know I'm not the kind of person who would do this. Prove it in front of everyone. Chloe desperately appealed to Austin to affirm her innocence. But no one believed Chloe's story anymore. Soon, the police arrived, and from the audio and the subsequent security camera footage, it was clear that Chloe was the perpetrator. She was taken to the police station and arrested. The reason she did this was because the baby was a girl. Chloe had always been fixated on having a grandson, and when she found out the baby in the womb was a girl, she was disappointed. She thought that by pretending this baby never existed, she could try for a boy next time. When I heard this from the police, my head went blank with shock. Despite all that had happened, the baby grew healthily in an incubator and was discharged after 2 months. A few days after coming home from the hospital, Austin visited our apartment to apologize for the incident. He said that he and Chloe had divorced, that their house was sold, and he was going to move back to his family home. It was sad that the house where Brandon had grown up was gone, but since Austin wasn't to blame, we told him he was always welcome to visit. We regularly let Austin see his granddaughter after that. He adored his first grandchild and played with her with such kindness in his eyes. 3 years later, our second child, a boy, was born. Our daughter, now a big sister, couldn't wait to take care of her brother and was always by his side. Watching them was heartwarming, and every day was filled with happiness. But that happiness was disrupted by a visit from someone. The doorbell rang repeatedly, and when I checked the monitor, to my surprise, it was Chloe. I thought I would never see her again, and seeing her brought back memories of that day, making me feel nauseous. What do you want now? I have no intention of seeing you again. Please leave, I said, but Chloe wouldn't listen. Apparently, Chloe had fallen ill, struggling daily with her health and finding it difficult to go to the hospital without a car. She had divorced Austin, and their house was now just an empty lot. She had no one else to turn to for help. Shockingly, Chloe knew I had given birth to a boy. She had apparently seen us in town, noticing Brandon holding our son. To Chloe, it was the long-desired grandson. She was determined to live with us and make the boy fond of her. So you finally became a proper woman, giving birth to a boy. When you were pregnant with a girl, I was so disappointed in you. But now that you've had a boy, let's forget the past and live together, shall we? For a moment, I doubted my own ears. Live together after all that? Impossible. What are you talking about? After what you did, living together is impossible. Leave now, or I'll call the police. Unfortunately, Brandon was at work at this crucial time. In distress, I immediately called Austin. He was supposed to visit the apartment today to see his son and daughter. With trembling hands, I called Austin. It turned out he was already near the apartment, so he hurried over. When Austin arrived, Chloe exclaimed in surprise. We couldn't argue in the entrance of the apartment building, as it would disturb others. But I had no intention of letting Chloe, whom we had cut ties with, into our apartment again. I gave Chloe an ultimatum, telling her I would call the police if she really didn't leave. Realizing her wish wouldn't be fulfilled, Chloe started to create a scene at the entrance and began arguing with Austin. Troubled, I contacted Brandon at work. After hearing the situation, Brandon called the police, and they soon arrived at our apartment. The police, understanding the situation, took Chloe away in a police car. As the commotion was in a conspicuous place, several residents of the apartment witnessed it. I felt sorry for causing inconvenience to many people. Later, after Brandon returned home, we discussed the situation with Austin and decided to move. As long as we lived here, Chloe would surely come back. We couldn't risk something happening to the children next time. Besides, Austin, though he said he had gone back to his family home, was living alone since his parents had passed away. Our daughter liked Austin and had previously expressed a desire to live with him. Austin is a kind person, and leaving him alone at his age worried us. When we proposed living together, Austin was very happy, despite everything that had happened. Afterwards, we bought a used property in the next town. Though it was second-hand, the house itself was very nice, and the surrounding environment was good too. Living in a high-rise was nice, but raising children in a place surrounded by nature seemed better. Right after moving, my daughter and Austin went to a mountain to hunt for beetles. Seeing them so happy made me feel that deciding to live together and choosing this place was the right decision. Once a month, we invite my parents over, and we all enjoy a home party, leading a happy life. Meanwhile, according to someone I was close with at the high-rise apartment, Chloe, undeterred, visited the high-rise again. But when told we had moved and she couldn't find out where, she left disappointed. If it weren't for what happened, Chloe might have been here, feeling the children's growth with us. Well, it's a natural consequence, but still. Later, I heard Chloe reluctantly returned to her hometown, rented a small apartment, and now lives a lonely life, working part-time in cleaning. My name is Olivia. I'm 35 and have been married to my husband Lucas for 7 years. We have a 5-year-old son, Thomas. Normally, it's just the three of us living a peaceful life, but I have one major grievance. It's the long vacations and Christmas when we go to Lucas's parents' house. Only his parents live there, but during the holidays, his sister and her family join us too. During these gatherings, which sometimes exceed 10 people, I'm expected to handle all the meal preparations. Because I'm married to the eldest son, everyone seems to think it's my duty. His sisters don't help me at all. On top of that, they leave their kids with me and go out to have fun. Even Lucas doesn't offer me any help, so as the holidays approach, I start to dread them. Just the thought of preparing meals at my in-laws is painful, not to mention the harassment I endure from Lucas's mother, Ava. From the beginning of our marriage, Ava has criticized everything I do. The first time we went to visit after getting married, she told me out of the blue, "Olivia, please prepare all the meals while you're here." I was shocked. It was my first time in their kitchen, and everything was thrown at me. In a panic, I checked the fridge, finding almost nothing. I had to start by shopping for groceries. "Do you want anything specific to eat?" I asked with a smile without showing my irritation. "Just make something delicious. Don't check with us every time. just get on with the cooking. Jackson, Lucas's father, seemed nice and calm, but I couldn't figure out what he really thought. Ava was always openly hostile towards me. Even when I casually asked Lucas about his parents' favorite dishes, anything's fine, don't worry too much about it. He always responds so casually. Lucas is originally unreliable, but since then, my distrust in him has only grown. In the end, I decided to make a safe choice and cook curry. As the smell of curry began to waft from the kitchen, Ava started her snide remarks. Curry gives me heartburn. I'll have to take some antacid tonight. Without time to make anything else, I served the curry for dinner. Ava complained that the curry was too spicy, or that she preferred pork over beef. Anyone can make a decent curry, she remarked, leaving the comment hanging in the air, yet she went for seconds. Meanwhile, Jackson ate without saying a word, but after he finished, he let out a deep sigh and left the room. While Ava's reactions are irritating, Jackson's sigh feels more condemning than her snide remarks. Dealing with just my in-laws' meals is stressful enough, but it gets even worse when Lucas's sisters and their families join. Harper's family consists of Lucas's sister Harper, her husband Ethan, and their daughter. Harper, in her appearance and manner of speaking, is frighteningly similar to Ava. Together, they hurl insults at me, making it feel like there are two Avas. When Harper comes to visit, she expects me to handle everything from cooking to making beds. Of course, she doesn't thank me, she takes it for granted. Ethan, usually quiet around his in-laws and Harper, becomes tyrannical when they're not around. Go buy cigarettes, he'd demand, treating me more like a housemaid than family. Their daughter Emma, much like Harper, seems spiteful. Olivia, we're out of juice. Then Ethan would join in, ordering. Olivia, I'm out of beer. Bring some. Laughing foolishly, the two of them enjoy themselves. They are usually quiet in front of Harper, probably because they're used to being scolded by her. They seem to let loose when at the in-laws. For me, who ends up doing all the work, it's unbearable. Natalie's family includes Lucas's sister Natalie, her husband Mason, and their son. Compared to the insidious Ava and Harper, Natalie is brighter and easier to talk to. She always comes to chat while I'm preparing meals. While it's nice to be approached so casually, Natalie doesn't help at all. At first, I used to listen to her seriously, but if she's not going to help, she's just in the way. Eventually, when I responded non-committally to her chatter, "Are you even listening to me?" she'd snap. Busy with work, I had to listen to Natalie's endless, meaningless stories about her husband's complaints or her in-laws' snide remarks. I wanted to vent to Natalie too, but I couldn't dare speak ill of the in-laws. As soon as Natalie realizes I'm not fully engaged, she'd tattle to Ava and Harper. Then I'd get scolded by both Ava and Harper. Just because she's your sister-in-law doesn't mean you can ignore her. You should at least listen to her. Such a mean spirit, bullying your weaker sister. They'd freely insult me. I wanted to retort, who's the mean one here? But I didn't have the courage. All I could do was endure the long vacations and Christmases. Even when I was pregnant, the treatment didn't change. I worked as usual the day after I gave birth, Ava would brag, expecting the same from me. I heard from Lucas that Ava had been badly harassed by her mother-in-law too. It seems she's intent on making me experience the same misery. I wish she would stop returning the ill treatment she received onto her daughter-in-law. Thomas was born in December, so that year, we didn't go to the in-laws for Christmas. Why don't you go home alone? I suggested to Lucas. He replied grumpily. It's boring to go back by myself, so let's skip it this year. He informed me that year, the siblings didn't stay at the in-laws for Christmas as usual. They left immediately. Without me there, nobody could handle the meal preparations, so no one stayed overnight. But from the next vacation onwards, the hellish treatment at the in-laws returned. Now, I had to take care of Thomas while preparing meals and accommodations. When Thomas dirted his clothes and I had to do laundry at the in-laws, since we're letting you use the washing machine, do our laundry as well. They started making me wash their laundry too. Seeing this, the sisters-in-law began piling their laundry on me as well. I ended up folding Ava's and her sister's laundry. Completely turned into a housemaid, they even dumped childcare on me. Looking after one or two kids is the same. Please take care of my son, they'd say before leaving the newborn with me and going out to have fun with Ava and the family. Only Jackson stayed home, pretending not to notice anything and watching TV. I was shocked when even Lucas left with Ava and the others. From that moment, my affection for Lucas began to cool off. As I was taking care of the two babies, one of them would inevitably start crying. Then Jackson would explode in anger.
The noise is so loud, I can't hear the TV. Finally got rid of the annoying bunch, and I can't even watch TV in peace.
Jackson, usually quiet in front of Ava and her daughters, didn't hesitate to complain to me. I hated his silent pressure on regular days, but him yelling like this was just pathetic. The men in this house only act tough when the women aren't around, then badmouth them behind their backs. Especially Mason, who is amusing to watch because of his drastic two-faced nature. In front of Ava and the sisters-in-law, he's all smiles, serving food and drinks diligently. But when the women are absent, he's swapping nasty comments about their wives with Ethan. Not caring about how it affects me, his wife, they freely talk trash.
Why do we have to come here every vacation and Christmas? I feel the same. It's nothing but torture for us husbands.
Moreover,
just between us, my marriage isn't going too well, so next time I might not be here.
They'd say, laughing uproariously. Whether they're joking or serious. They don't care that I'm listening, the conversation escalates. Honestly, my marriage isn't great either. My wife is too domineering, always looking down on me. They glanced around, and seeing it was just me, they began whispering.
My wife is just like her mother. Thinking about her getting even tougher with age is dreadful. Daughters do resemble their mothers, don't they? Recently, even her face is starting to look like her mother's, and it's creepy.
Both of them were rolling on the floor, laughing at their own words. I began to wonder if Lucas also talked badly about me when I wasn't around. These two, laughing at such talk, would transform into entirely different people the moment Ava or the sisters-in-law appeared. They knew that if I told Ava or the sisters-in-law about their behavior, I would be the one accused of lying. That's why they felt free to speak ill of Ava and the sisters-in-law in front of me. Year by year, the workload dumped on me during the holidays at the in-laws grew heavier. Apart from meals, overnight arrangements, childcare, and laundry, now I was even tasked with picking up and dropping off Natalie's family. During a meal right before everyone was about to leave.
I'd like a beer, but I have to drive home, so maybe I should refrain.
Mason mentioned. Hearing this, Ava chimed in. From next time, let's have Olivia pick you up. That way, you can drink beer without any worries. She suggested to Mason. Mason, perhaps jokingly, agreed, but Ava took it seriously. No, you don't need to go that far, he said. But cutting off his words, Ava commanded. From now on, you will do the pickups. No one dared to object. In the car back home, even I, usually restrained, lashed out at Lucas.
I'm already cooking, arranging accommodations, taking care of the kids, and even doing everyone's laundry. Now I have to do pickups too.
Lucas, taken aback by my anger, was at a loss for words.
Is there no limit to harassing your wife? How much more do they want to exploit me?
My anger was justified. The in-laws' house was in a snowy region, making Christmas visits challenging. Natalie's house was a 2-hour drive one way, but in heavy snow, it could take nearly double that time. I knew Ava would expect me to finish cooking and then go pick up Natalie's family. Exhausted and asked to drive in such conditions was absurd. I'm not accustomed to long drives, and surely Natalie's family would be terrified too. I was furious that Lucas, knowing this, didn't stand up to Ava.
I'm cutting ties with your family. I won't see Jackson, Ava, or your sisters ever again.
I didn't want to see Ava or the sisters who did as they pleased. Hoping to calm my fury, he responded with a forced smile. Totally fine. I'll let Mom and everyone know, so don't worry. When Lucas talks smoothly like this, he's usually just trying to appease the situation. But with his agreement, I finally felt freed from the in-laws' clutches. I marvel at my own patience over the past 7 years of marriage. That Christmas, I went on a trip with Thomas and my parents. It was the first time since Thomas was born that I spent Christmas with my parents. It's rare for us to be together for Christmas. Is it okay for Lucas to go back to his parents alone? Having shared my in-laws' harsh treatment with them, my parents were surprised by the trip.
It's okay. I have Lucas's permission, so he won't complain.
I assured them, though I wasn't sure if Lucas had really talked to his parents. He had reluctantly agreed to cut ties with his family after my outburst, but I doubted his parents and sisters would accept it easily. They had been taking it easy so far, likely avoiding preparing meals themselves. However, they probably thought they could easily buy meals from the supermarket, so I assumed they weren't too worried. My parents, seeing their grandson Thomas after a long time, were overjoyed, and Thomas seemed to have fun too. When we visited the in-laws, I never had time to pay attention to Thomas, and I realized he must have felt lonely. Watching the three of them having fun, I completely forgot about the in-laws. Then, in the lobby of the luxurious hotel where we were relaxing, a familiar man walked in with a young woman on his arm. He resembled Mason, but he was supposed to be at the in-laws. The more I looked, the more he seemed familiar, and it appeared he noticed my stare. The man made a surprised face and quickly turned away. Likely because he was up to something shady. I pretended not to see and averted my gaze from the man. Just then, I received a call from Lucas.
Hello, what's up? Please, can you come to the family home right now? It's chaos here, nothing is prepared. Haven't we agreed that I wouldn't go anymore from this year?
I wasn't surprised, I had expected something like this.
I did mention it, but it seems the message didn't get across.
He replied. I figured he hadn't really talked to his parents. I had already informed them that I wouldn't be able to pick up Natalie's family. Natalie had complained, but it seemed she had been pacified. Lucas was desperately trying to get me to come back. But I was more focused on the commotion and what sounded like Natalie's voice in the background.
Mason has run off with some woman. He said he was going to work, but when I called the office, they said he was off today.
Hearing Natalie's words confirmed that the man I saw was indeed her husband.
Mason is at the hotel we're staying at right now,
I responded. Lucas was taken aback by the sudden shift in the conversation.
What? My brother-in-law is there?
I decided to tell the truth, thinking it would serve Natalie right for how she had treated me. Natalie must have heard Lucas's voice, as she snatched his mobile phone and started shouting at me.
Mason is there! Where are you right now?
Natalie screamed, almost rupturing my eardrums. Young and beautiful woman, high-class hotel. I replied. Next, Ava grabbed the phone and started yelling at me.
How dare you go to a hotel on your own? You think that's acceptable?
Even though they're shouting at me loudly, I can hear them.
I've discussed this with Lucas. I have his permission to not associate with you anymore.
I replied, deliberately provoking her. Ava started screaming something incomprehensible. Then Harper snatched the phone.
We can't even have a meal without you. Please, somehow come back.
Harper said, unusually polite, but I knew she only spoke like that when in trouble. In the background, Emma, Harper's ill-natured daughter, yelled,
Olivia! Hurry up and prepare the meal!
I couldn't help but laugh, realizing she was just echoing Harper's true feelings. The in-laws' house seemed to be in such a frenzy that I just hung up the phone. Since I had set my phone to reject calls, I didn't know what happened afterward until Lucas returned home. Seeing Lucas's reaction upon his return, I was prepared for the possibility of divorce. Worst case scenario, I was ready to make a life for Thomas and myself as an office worker. When Lucas returned from his parents' house, he apologized profoundly.
I now understand how hard it's been for you all this time. I'm truly sorry.
Lucas had been burdened with preparing the Christmas meal, doing everyone's laundry, and taking care of the kids, especially Natalie's child, throughout the holiday. Natalie, after hearing from me about the affair, had tracked Mason down to our hotel, apparently catching him in the act. Indeed, when we were leaving, the hotel staff seemed flustered, and there was talk of a quarreling couple. Perhaps that was her. Everyone had complained about Lucas's cooking, having never done it before, and, fed up with their nasty remarks.
I'm cutting ties with this house too. I'm never coming back,
he snapped. It seems Lucas has declared cutting ties as well. Hearing Lucas's declaration of disconnection, I felt relieved and confessed.
If you hadn't decided to cut ties with your family, I was planning to divorce you.
Smiling as I said this, Lucas began to cry and apologized again. I'm really sorry. Believing in his tears, I decided to keep striving together as a couple. From that year on, we decided to go on trips with my parents for Christmas. Both my parents and our family are delighted, and we intend to keep this tradition. Meanwhile, the in-laws' house doesn't seem to gather anyone anymore. Natalie and her husband divorced soon after. Natalie, having custody of the child, now had to work to support her life, leaving her with no long vacations or Christmases. Harper also realized that if the other siblings didn't return, she would have to prepare the meals herself, and didn't want to go through that hassle just to visit her parents' house. Left alone, the in-laws led a lonely life, unable to see their children or grandchildren. Ava, unable to harass anyone else, seemed to have turned her frustrations on Jackson, and I heard from Lucas that Jackson had left home. Lucas, deeply affected by the criticism of his cooking at the in-laws, has been cooking more often lately. Watching Lucas improve his cooking skills makes all that commotion feel like a distant memory. Suddenly, my parents appeared and started knocking on the car window.
Dad, did someone ask you for something?
Well, what could that be?
You're always so stubborn. Just go and convince your husband, James. Say the chairman should be William because it's better for the company and step down. Or else.
So, they've teamed up with my in-laws to knock James off the chairman's seat. And then I noticed, in Mom's hand was something like a crowbar. She swung it high and crash, the window shattered. I was stunned for a while when I heard that a suicide note was found in James's car, who had fallen off a cliff. Then, a week after the car was found, an envelope arrived with a specific delivery date. James? I hurriedly received the envelope and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter. And a key.
Read this without our parents finding out.
Of course, I knew that. But he probably wanted to write it that way.
This is something I wrote in advance, in case something happened. If I'm there when you receive it, just laugh and give it back to me. But if I'm not there, please, Linda, take what's stored in this locker and flee to your Uncle Richard's place immediately.
Susan, my sister-in-law who was reading it with me, and I exchanged glances. And then we immediately grabbed the essentials and ran to Richard's house, my husband's uncle. To protect ourselves and our children, and to let both our parents know what they had done. My name is Linda, 34 years old. I'd like to say I'm just an ordinary housewife, but that was only true until a week ago. Now, I'm a widow with 2 children. James took his own life. That's the most likely possibility, I was told. His car had fallen off a cliff. And a suicide note was found in the dashboard. I can't believe it, I won't believe it. Because it's true. There's no reason for James to take his own life. By himself. Rather. James and I met at our workplace. A real estate resort hotel, the place I had always wanted to work. As a child, I was captivated by a large, beautiful hotel I visited at the invitation of my parents' acquaintance. I chose a university that would teach me important things for the tourism industry, and even my part-time jobs during my student years were behind the scenes at nearby hotels. And finally, I got a job at the resort hotel I had always dreamed of. It was a place known for its strict employee training, and I almost gave up early on. The reason I was able to keep going was thanks to a colleague at that time. People quit one after another, unable to withstand it, but someone was watching over me, the one who remained. That person was James, who later became my husband. We dated for 2 years before getting married. But I was surprised by a fact I learned at that time. James was the nephew of the chairman of this real estate group. He was supposed to become a part of the group's upper echelon eventually, but at that time, he was still working as a resort hotel employee. After our marriage, James moved from the hotel to the real estate side and started showing his face at his uncle's, the chairman's, office. Originally, this group was just a local real estate business, but it grew significantly after the war. The current chairman is the second since the group was formed, and it's said that Richard's skills played a major role in its growth. During the good times, he convinced his parents, so they suffered less when the economy turned bad. Then they started developing resorts, and that too was steadily advanced. But things started getting fishy around Richard when he fell ill last year. And that was because Richard had no direct heir. That's when Richard appointed James as his successor. And that decision shortened James's life. I couldn't quite come to terms with the news from the police that James had died. In the midst of that, my in-laws kept calling. Linda, what happened to James was something terrible. Something terrible? Is that how these people summarize their own son's situation? Hey, Linda, it's going to be tough on your own, right? Come and live at our house. That's right. With James gone, you're going to have financial difficulties, right? William and Jessica, my father-in-law and mother-in-law, took turns speaking such words to me. Feeling irritated, I responded, I can't think about the future right now. And with that, I hung up the phone. What now? I thought. After all, I had only met these in-laws twice. First time, to announce our marriage, and the second time was our wedding day. They never even showed their faces when our son and daughter were born. Yes, James had always avoided his parents, my in-laws. He had harbored distrust towards them since our marriage, saying to me, "Those people are scum who never even try to work for themselves." James's parents currently hold certain posts within the Smith Real Estate Group. But that's just to keep them from doing anything. James had explained to me. He said they were completely different from the capable Richard, and everything they did turned out to be a detriment to the group. So they're given nominal positions just to keep them from messing up. Just going on inspections, which are basically just vacations, he said. Didn't they take you on those trips, letting you see various places? James scoffed at the thought. Me and Susan were always left behind in our big house. James had a sister named Susan. Susan married a man with no connections to the group and lived in the city where he worked. Robert, Susan's husband and James's brother-in-law, got along strangely well with James. He would go out of his way to visit James when he was nearby for work. Susan would be like, "I'm jealous of James," seeing how close they were. Yes, the two siblings got along well. And both had a strained relationship with their parents. But I'm fine with it. Once I got married and moved away, I didn't care about them anymore. Susan said nonchalantly. But James is involved with the group. And that means? Our parents know they're the failures of the group, so they hate seeing James do well. Is that how it is? At our house, yes. But your parents are different, right? Not at all. Yes. My relationship with my parents was not good either. No, it was fine when I was a child. As their only daughter, I thought they loved me. But their true nature emerged when I was in college. Quit college and come back home. That was the sudden message I received. It was for a marriage proposal. They wanted to make me, a 20-year-old at the most, come back home for that reason. Apparently, Thomas, the son of a well-known local figure, had taken a liking to me when he returned home. I insist on having her as my wife. To fulfill Thomas's spoiled wish, my parents were willing to do it for their own benefit. We've raised you so far, so you should show filial piety towards us, right? I felt my image of my parents shatter. They had raised me, their daughter, just for the sake of a return. Realizing this, I firmly refused to return home. Then, they stopped sending me money for education and living expenses. They thought that would make me come back. But I stubbornly refused to return. I consulted with my professor and found a way to continue my studies without being taken back by my parents. It was a struggle until I graduated. I managed to cover my educational expenses through scholarships. The problem was living expenses. I moved out of my secure one-room apartment, sold unused furniture, and moved into an older apartment. My life revolved around university, part-time jobs, and job hunting. I only went back to my room to sleep. As a result, this part-time job experience led to employment and meeting James. And my parents were oddly happy about my marriage to James. Aren't they good parents? Comparing them to his own, James said with a wry smile. No. They did their research. They found out that you are the nephew of the chairman of the real estate group. You're kidding. James couldn't believe it for a while. But when my parents visited for the births of our son Daniel and our daughter Mary, James also realized they were not so different from his own parents. After all, my parents said,
"Now that you have 2 kids, your future is secure. Yes, it'll make our lives easier too."
James's smile twisted slightly at that moment. Both James and I were sensitive to the words of parents. Especially James, who knew about my struggles during college. Were they a bit too relaxed, or did they just take it for granted? Either way, their words were clearly meant to mooch off of us and our kids in the future. After that, James started to be wary of them too. Distant in-laws, parents trying too hard to make contact. While being cautious of both, I continued raising our children. Fortunately, with James' current position and salary, we could afford a housekeeper and a sitter. We don't have trustworthy relatives, but we've managed on our own. But last year, things changed. Richard fell ill. Richard, in his 60s, who always kept fit and seemed immune to sickness, suddenly faced a health crisis. He was in good shape, with no blood pressure issues that I knew of. But an impact he suffered on his head when he was young had now formed a hematoma, pressing on his brain. Emergency surgery saved him, and he was on a good path to recovery with no lasting effects. However, this incident shook the group as Richard hadn't named a successor. Richard himself thought, "I can still keep going." That's probably why he hadn't decided yet. But illness strikes unexpectedly. Once you know that, you have to think about a successor. And here's where the problem arose, the choice of who it would be. Richard and his wife had no children. No biological or adopted child was there at that time. So, Richard, while recuperating, nominated James. It seemed a reasonable choice within the group. Most senior employees knew that James was being trained and educated within the group. But some just couldn't accept it. The in-laws.
"Wait a minute, Richard. Isn't he still too young? Aren't I the closest one to you, Richard? Why are you overlooking William for James?"
They apparently confronted Richard while he was recuperating. Richard retorted sharply,
"If I leave it to William and the others, the group will be ruined."
And he explained clearly why he chose James. But then, their focus shifted to James.
"Step down, say you're too young and want your parents to take over."
Those were their words. It was a threat, clear and simple. Initially, it was, "Please." But gradually it turned into,
"Do something about it, or else."
Their tone changed.
"This is bad."
"What do you mean?"
"They might harm me, you, and our kids if we let them be." "Really?"
I initially wondered if they would go that far.
"They would,"
James said.
"I never thought of them as my parents. And they probably don't think of us siblings as their children. No, that's not right. They only see children as tools to generate profit. I feel the same about my side."
"No." James shook his head.
"Their level of scum is worse. Your parents are just hanging on for profit, but mine, they'll try to take everything. Then what should we do?"
His use of the word take startled me. We had finally found a family filled with love and trust. I didn't want anyone to be hurt.
"I have an idea. I'll make sure the condo's security is tight against intruders. So Linda, please protect the kids when you're outside of the house."
"I'm not sure if I can handle it alone."
"I'll ask a security company through Richard. They'll discreetly guard you when you're out." "Understood,"
I responded. Since then, I've chosen popular places for outings with the kids. I also actively participated in gatherings with mom friends. It's harder for them to harm us when we're in a group. But still, there was a time when someone tried to kidnap one of the kids. It first happened at the park while playing with the other kids. I thought I would just be chatting with mom friends while we watched our kids play. But then, a plump middle-aged woman, who seemed to be just strolling, suddenly picked up Mary and started running. Luckily, the security guard, who was watching over us discreetly, quickly intervened. But the woman who tried to kidnap Mary ran away with surprising agility. In the end, we never found out why or who was behind it.
People, be careful, it's a scary world out there.
Everyone would just say. We agreed on a common understanding to be wary of both money motives and pranks. But I had forgotten one thing to be wary of. Hey there. I ran into my parents in the condo's parking lot. It was right after shopping with the kids, as we were getting out of the car. I quickly turned back into the car and locked it. Blatantly, my parents started banging on the car windows.
Mom, why are Grandpa and Grandma doing this? I'm scared.
I cracked the window just enough to speak through it. I really didn't want to open it, but we couldn't talk with it closed.
What do you want? Ah, you finally opened it. Listen, Linda, could you please talk to James?
What? You know, isn't it a bit off that young James is becoming the next chairman? Shouldn't it be William's turn? A chill ran down my spine. Could it be that these people?
Dad, did someone ask you to do this?
What? I don't know what you're talking about. Dad pretended not to know what I was talking about. And Mom said, "You're always so stubborn. Just go and convince your husband, James. Say the chairman should be William because it's better for the company and step down. Or else." In Mom's hand was something like a crowbar. Then she swung it high and crash, the window shattered. The kids screamed. Mom reached her hand through the broken window.
Get down!
I yelled to the kids and frantically honked the horn, signaling to the security guard who must have been nearby. Thankfully, several men soon came running. Tisk! My parents clicked their tongues and quickly left the scene, escaping in a nearby car.
Are you okay?
The security guards asked us. I'm fine, but the kids.
I'm okay.
Daniel responded loudly. But it was true that shards of glass had fallen on both of them. I'll head back to our room now. Can you escort us to the entrance, please? The guards agreed and escorted us. The manager was surprised at our situation and promised to thoroughly guard against outsiders. That night, I told James everything.
My own parents, of all people. Ah, they must have been convinced. Offering a good position if they become chairman or something.
It was likely. Very likely. Why did both our parents have to be such people? This is seriously bad. I'll go to Richard and ask him to look after you and the kids for a while. To Richard? Yes, but we have to make sure we're not noticed. Also, I'll contact Susan. I want her to stay with you and the kids for a bit. But won't that be a burden on Susan? Considering who we're dealing with, it's necessary. They might think the same thing could happen to Susan since she's of the same bloodline. We're better off making a united front. With that, James immediately contacted Susan.
Unbelievable. Those people. All right, James, I'll join you. What about Robert?
Robert's got work, right? Well, yeah, but okay, I'll talk to him. Thanks. It's good to have siblings at times like this. I thought to myself. And the next day, Susan came over promptly. I told Robert about the situation, and he said he's got something to look into and will join us later. Really? Robert's reliable.
Well, he is the man I chose.
We laughed together. But the day after that conversation, the call from the police came. We've found James Smith's car at the bottom of a cliff. I couldn't grasp the meaning of the words immediately. What does that mean? He was brought into the hospital earlier. I couldn't quite process the rest of the words. Mrs. Smith, are you listening? I heard the voice from the other end, but I couldn't move right away. Shocked, Susan took over the call. After that, it felt like I was just being dragged around by Susan everywhere. We went to the police, confirmed things, and were handed an envelope found on the dashboard. A will. When opened, there was a printed letter inside. The content was,
I can't bear the burden of being nominated as chairman. I'm sorry.
That's what it said.
So, has the police concluded that James took his own life? No, there's still an autopsy and other procedures, so the final conclusion will come later. We're just showing you this because it was found.
There's no way he'd do this to himself.
I was shouting loudly.
James, who always told us to be careful.
I couldn't find any more words after that. The police said,
"We'll contact you when it's time to return James's body,"
and sent us home. I can't clearly remember what happened for a while after that. The local news on TV was saying, "It's not yet clear whether it was an accident." Having said that, they also said, "A suicide note was found, and there's a strong belief that he took his own life." That was how it was reported on the news. I was so angry, I turned off the TV, and the kids looked at me anxiously.
Is Daddy coming back?
Daniel is 8, Mary just 5. Both of them had been taken out of school and kindergarten for a while. I was truly grateful Susan was there. My mind felt like it was covered with a thin film at that time. Everything felt unreal. However, a week after the car was found, an envelope arrived with a specific delivery date.
Linda, take a look at this.
Susan handed it to me, who was in a daze. I glanced at the sender's name and my eyes widened. James? In a rush, I took the envelope and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter. And a key.
Read this without our parents finding out.
Of course, I knew that. But he probably wanted to write it that way.
This is something I wrote in advance in case something happened. If I'm there when you receive it, just give it back to me. But if I'm not, please, Linda, take what's stored in this locker and run to Richard's place immediately.
Susan and I, reading it together, looked at each other. Then hurriedly, taking only the bare minimum, we took the kids and all got into Susan's car. My car had been under repair since that time. I didn't feel confident driving a rental car to Richard's in the next state. So, I relied on Susan.
Leave it to me, just wear a hat and a mask,
Susan said with a smile. And then we drove non-stop. We were anxious until we reached Richard's house in the next state. I assumed security guards were nearby. But after what happened to James, I was worried something might happen to the car. While on the road, I contacted Richard's house.
We're on our way.
We parked inside the property and hurried towards the main house. Richard and his wife Nancy were already there to greet us.
We're glad you're here, Linda, Susan. James asked us to guard you guys, and said he'd send you guys here eventually. But to think it would come to this.
Thank you for having us. I'm sorry. This was the only place we could turn to. I apologized deeply. The kids were looking around the grand entrance in amazement.
Don't worry. I didn't expect it to come to this. I underestimated them. I never thought they'd actually target James himself, those bastards.
Richard clenched his fist in frustration. We were led into a large, cozy living room. The room had a calm and warm atmosphere. Nancy instructed the housekeeper, then brought the kids to a corner of the room with some snacks.
Thank you so much. It's all right. You want to keep the kids in sight right now, don't you?
Yes, I didn't want to take my eyes off of them even for a moment. But the conversation we were about to have was not something I wanted the children to hear directly.
William has always been rotten, but we lacked a decisive move to exclude him from the group. Letting him float around led to this mess.
It's not your fault, Richard. My parents were involved in this too. James and I both had terrible parents. If only we had adopted James into our family earlier.
Nancy muttered. Then Richard looked up.
That's right, that's a good idea. Call the lawyer.
Richard, I don't want those kids to end up like James.
Richard said this and made me a proposal.
Eventually, James's body, after the autopsy, was brought to Richard's house for a private funeral and a memorial service within the group. I attended with the kids, as the representative of the bereaved family. Behind us, my parents sat shamelessly as James's in-laws. Colleagues from the company, all puzzled and saddened by James's sudden loss, were in attendance. He was truly an excellent employee. We were looking forward to his future in the group.
Thank you. James would be honored to hear that.
I mechanically repeated these greetings. Friends who joined the company at the same time as James were.
How could this happen?
Crying over the sudden loss. Everyone who had personal ties with James was genuinely good. But their parents. After the memorial service, Richard gathered the family, my parents, and the executives at his house. The large garden and halls of Richard's house were crowded with people. Then, someone came running in. Robert! He must have just arrived. Robert came running in, clutching a bag.
Sorry I'm late, Susan, Linda. There were a lot of complications on my end. But it's good that the memorial service and the meeting were scheduled for today. It worked out.
Robert had a sly smile.
I'll return this to you.
Robert took out a set of documents and a USB drive from his bag.
Is it all settled?
It was from the locker indicated by the key we received earlier. After leaving in Susan's car, we met up with Robert, who made copies of the documents and the drive.
You've given the copies to our lawyer, right?
Yes.
That's good. We really needed the originals here.
I nodded vigorously. At the meeting that started, Richard spoke in front of everyone about the incident, expressing his regrets over losing James, the successor. Then, when he paused, Richard continued.
It's a real shame. And I think there's one thing I was wrong about.
Richard called me and my two kids forward. The kids, understandably, looked frightened and almost tearful amidst the row of adults. I told them, "It's okay," and supported them from behind. Here, I want to appoint the next successors. My new children, Daniel and Mary. They are James's children, but I have adopted them.
The children?
The crowd murmured. Many might be surprised. But I believe this tragedy occurred because I left James as just a nephew. Right? At Richard's words, all eyes turned to my in-laws. Richard, what are you saying? Should I say it here? Yes, go ahead.
James took his own life, right? A suicide note was found. Probably couldn't handle the expectations.
Really? You still have more to say?
Yes. And these children as Richard's adoptees? Putting unnecessary pressure on them again? Well, they are William's grandchildren, so maybe they won't feel that much pressure.
Ugh. William's face twisted.
Actually, James didn't take his own life.
Richard declared firmly. The crowd stirred. What are you saying?
The note was found in the dashboard.
No media outlet reported that it was found in the dashboard. That's when Robert spoke up.
May I?
He asked Richard for permission to speak.
Please, go ahead.
Meanwhile, William was visibly struggling.
But if it was found in the car, then... That's just it. We haven't leaked anything to the media. Or perhaps, William, you weren't really interested in my affairs.
Saying this, Robert pulled out a police badge from his suit pocket. Yes, Robert was a detective in the state police where we lived.
Ugh.
William choked on his words. Did he really not realize? I was genuinely astonished. Indeed, Susan had said, "We haven't been in touch since he got the job." So I have heard about it before. Even when they got married, they only reported so. But shouldn't one at least be aware of the other's profession?
That's just the kind of person he is.
Susan's whisper was quietly heard.
I could only provide crucial evidence for the investigation, being an insider.
Then Robert explained. The police had been thoroughly investigating the car retrieved from the cliff since the beginning.
They soon realized that the brakes had been tampered with, which happened to be on the day James sent a letter through a scheduled delivery. That day, James first went to place something in a locker at the station. Then, he went to a post office inside the station to send a letter to Linda. It took him some time. It was then that someone tampered with the brake fluid system. But that alone wasn't enough to cause immediate trouble. After that, James drove towards Richard's house. But on the way to here, there are several winding roads, right? Whispers began among the people around. Indeed. Many voices agreed. That's where a road rage incident happened, intentionally. And this road isn't always wide. Indeed, a local quirk is that despite being a frequently used road, it's surprisingly narrow in places. In such a situation, forced to precisely apply the brakes due to a road rage, I'm sure James soon realized the brakes were failing, but it was too late. So, that's what happened? Richard asked gravely. His words were vague, but the meaning was clear to all. Yes. And the police have identified the road rage driver from James's dashcam and have already apprehended him. Robert said, smiling wryly at my in-laws. But what does that have to do with us? The road rage participant was just a hired hand. The direct employer is still unknown. However, William, you and your wife are facing separate charges. Separate charges? Yes. For the embezzlement you've been committing for years. James had been secretly investigating this matter. This is the evidence. Suddenly, multiple projectors operated from somewhere lit up every wall with various documents. We will now arrest you for this embezzlement. Then, the back door opened and police officers entered. And one more thing. Robert glanced at me, then turned to another direction. You there. What, us? My parents hesitated. You're being arrested for damaging Linda's car. But that's just a family matter. Mom protested. I turned to her, asking sharply. A parent who breaks a car window with a bar? Indifferent to glass falling on their grandchildren's heads? I glared with all my might and said, You're not parents. My parents slumped back in their seats. Afterward, my in-laws, arrested for embezzlement, confessed to planning James's death during questioning, adding to their charges. My parents were also charged with aiding in their plan, in addition to property damage. The case was first leaked to local media, then reported by regional newspapers and local news. But it didn't end there. Given the sensational nature of the crime and the involvement of biological parents, it became fodder for national news and tabloid TV. And in this day and age, that was not enough. This was the digital age, they were branded indelibly. Even if they were released, what could they possibly do? But that's not my concern anymore. Since then, we've been living at Richard's house. His wife adores our 2 new children. Nancy, who always wanted but couldn't have children, is perhaps overindulging them a bit. But for now, that's okay. The kids, having just lost their dad, had to switch schools. I feel guilty for involving them in adult conflicts. But I believe this is the safest option. As for Richard, I must stay healthy at least until the kids are grown. He's diligently working on his fitness. Everyone, tea is ready. I spend my days in this house taking care of the kids and keeping these 2 company. I'm not sure how much I can contribute to them, but for the kids' sake, I'll keep doing my best. Stop leeching off me, you useless thing. For over 20 years, I believed I had devoted myself to my husband, Thomas. Yet, this is what Thomas really thought of me. I wasn't leeching off him. I was merely devoted to him. But I can't put these thoughts into words. As my strength drains away, Thomas continues. Now that Richard is a working adult, you've got no reason to leech off me, right? But... Quiet. I don't want to hear your excuses. Thomas raises his voice. Oh, I can't do this anymore. My feelings will never reach him.
At that moment, I hear something snap inside me. It's the sound of the thread of love that connected our hearts, breaking. At the same time, my feelings for him begin to fade. We were husband and wife until just now, but now he feels like a stranger. He had been using me from the start. He never loved me. Otherwise, he wouldn't blatantly cheat and try to kick me out. I don't care what happens to such a man. No, I must bring him down thoroughly. With my mind made up, I lift my face and stare intently at him. My name is Elizabeth. I'm a 50-year-old housewife, married to Thomas for 25 years. Our son Richard, born a few years into our marriage, graduated from college and started working this year. Now my childrearing days have come to an end, I can finally do what I want. That's what I'm thinking now. But there's one problem. It's my relationship with Thomas. He is neither a good husband nor a good father. In fact, it's hard to find anything good about him. He cheats, and he doesn't properly contribute to the household expenses.
Please, at least bring in enough for the living expenses.
Huh?
Don't get cocky when you're living off me.
That's always his response. Maybe it's hopeless. Should I consider divorce? Lately, I've been thinking about it more and more. But I can't easily bring myself to mention divorce. The truth is, his father, Joseph, who is currently hospitalized and in poor health, entrusted Thomas to my care. I have to be grateful to Joseph and bear it as long as I can. His words can't be ignored. But the desire to divorce is strong. Caught between these conflicting emotions, I find myself reminiscing about happier times before our marriage. The trigger for that past happiness was a misfortune that befell my father, David. My family runs a small eatery. My father was in charge of cooking, and my mother served the customers. Needless to say, the food was delicious. But my father was incredibly bad at business. His dream was to feed delicious food to the customers. As many people as possible. A noble idea, I think. But that was the only thing he focused on in running the eatery. So he doesn't really think about profitability. Profit didn't matter as long as the customers were satisfied. That was his way of doing business. Obviously, it wasn't profitable. Consequently, our family finances were always tight. Nevertheless, as a child, I was proud to see the satisfied customers. So I never interfered with my father's business. However, during my college years, a crisis struck. The company supplying ingredients to our eatery went bankrupt due to unforeseen circumstances.
We've already paid this month's bill. If this continues, we might have to close our restaurant.
Our situation was already difficult. There was no extra money to spare. Seeing my parents so upset made me anxious, but as a college student, there wasn't much I could do. And it was unlikely that the bankrupt company could refund. Our only option seemed to be closing our eatery. That's when a regular customer of the eatery said, "Closing this eatery? It's too good for that. What a waste."
But the company supplying us has gone bankrupt, and now we're in debt.
Then let me help you personally, and you can revive the eatery with that. The regular, truly lending the money immediately to my father. "You've saved us. We'll definitely repay you. Don't worry about the money for now. Just keep making delicious meals." Saying that, the man left the shop. Afterward, my father started dealing with a larger food wholesaler, which offered ingredients at a cheaper rate. Fortune seemed to smile upon us, and our family's eatery was saved from bankruptcy. About a year later, I went with my father to return the money to that regular customer. While my father and the man talked, a young man approached me. "It seems you've borrowed money from my father." Listening to him, I learned that he was the son of the man who lent us money. His name is Thomas, and he works for his father's company. "You're beautiful. How about going out with me sometime?" "Me? Go out with you? Why not?" Think of it as a way to say thanks for the loan. It's true that we were helped by the loan. But my father had already properly thanked him. I don't feel obliged to go that far,
But as I thought this, Thomas whispered to me, "The daughter of an eatery owner is ungrateful." I could spread that around, you know. But that's... I couldn't talk back. Even if he did spread rumors, I don't think it would harm me. But it could trouble my father. And what would the customers think? With these thoughts, I couldn't refuse his offer. I don't like it, but I'll tolerate it this once. With that thought, I went out with him. But it turned out to be more fun than I expected. He was interesting to talk to, and he knew lots of places to go. The restaurants he chose were all tastefully picked. Despite my initial bad impression, he might be a good person after all. Maybe it was wrong to think that way. I soon found myself being asked out by him. "I have fun when I'm with you." "I have fun too. It is my first time that I can think about marrying." "If that was to you who are serious and good girl." Swayed by his simple words, I started a relationship with him, considering marriage. After that, he continued to guide me in various ways. Eventually, a few years later, I found myself married to him. Of course, I never thought at the beginning of our marriage that it was all a trap by him. He seemed genuinely kind, and I felt loved by him. But it was all a lie. As soon as we got married, his attitude changed drastically. "Here, this is my salary for the month. Manage it well." I opened the envelope he handed me. It was a salary statement. The salary itself was transferred to the bank, so it wasn't strange to receive only the statement. What struck me as odd was that the statement was handwritten. Nowadays, it's almost unheard of. But when I got married, 25 years ago, it was a time when personal computers were just becoming widespread, so a handwritten statement wasn't out of place. "There's over $1,000, so it should be enough, right?" I murmured to myself, trying to be convinced. I managed our life with that small amount of money. As our marriage continued, I gradually felt something was off. It was his lifestyle. He left home at a fixed time every morning. But his return was never at a set time. It varied day by day. "I'm busy with various jobs as my father's successor." "Then, could you call before coming home?" "Stop nagging." "All right, I'll call," he shouted. His attitude made me feel even more uneasy. Maybe he's out playing around. Perhaps he even has an affair. I had these thoughts, but I was too scared of his shouting to confront him. In the end, I couldn't say anything, despite my doubts about his behavior. Eventually, our son Richard was born. I thought maybe he'd change a bit with a child. But he remained the same. Looking back, I think that's when I started considering divorce. Then, when Richard was about middle school age, I got a call from my mother while I was out shopping for dinner. "What? Dad's in the hospital." It was news of my father's hospitalization. I rushed to the hospital. "Mom's just exaggerating." My father laughed heartily. I felt relieved. But in that moment, I remembered something and my heart leaped. "Oh no! I forgot to contact Thomas." By then, it was too late. My mobile phone was filled with countless calls from him. When I called back in a hurry, his displeased voice came through. "Where are you? What are you doing? Hurry back and make my dinner." "I'm sorry. My father." "Huh? Your father? Your own father?" Thomas asked in a slightly harsh tone. I answered in a small voice. "Yes. He was suddenly hospitalized." "Your father has nothing to do with it. You are my wife." I closed my eyes in fear at his shouting. I'm terrified of his loud voice. But I couldn't just let it go without responding. I braced myself and retorted. "Isn't it natural to worry about one's father? That should be okay, right?" "Shut up. Don't talk back to me." "No, I will say this. You would rush to your own father's side, wouldn't you?" When I asked this, he suddenly fell silent. Putting himself in my shoes must have struck a chord. I thought so, but his reply was beyond my imagination. "Huh? Even if my father was hospitalized, I'd ignore it."
After all, I wouldn't be troubled if he wasn't around.
I was speechless. This has to be a lie. That's what I thought, but I couldn't deny it. After much hesitation, I had said this to him. I'm not like you.
Sorry, but eat out tonight.
That was all I could say, my maximum effort. I hung up the phone, still in a daze. Since that incident, I truly couldn't believe him anymore. It was then that I finally realized that the happy times before our marriage were all an illusion.
Ah, I see. He wanted a housekeeper, not a wife.
Saying it out loud made me sad. But I couldn't just stay sad.
That's right. If I'm going to divorce, I need to prepare.
I started to prepare for the divorce. And then, a few years passed. This time, Thomas's father, Joseph, was hospitalized. And his condition was quite serious.
He might not be able to leave the hospital,
the doctor had said. I relayed Joseph's condition to Thomas. But Thomas remained unbothered.
Does it mean it'll cost money?
It's not the time to worry about money, don't you understand?
I get it. I'll talk to my brother.
Thomas contacted his brother James. James is married but doesn't have children. So Thomas suggested to James that he might be able to bear the hospital expenses.
Can you pay for it? We have Richard and Elizabeth, and it's tough for us.
He spoke as if it was someone else's problem. It reminded me of the time my father was hospitalized. It seemed he really didn't care about Joseph. I couldn't take it anymore.
Enough. I'll figure something out and pay for Joseph's hospital bills. Don't forget what you just said,
Thomas shouted. I nodded firmly. In the end, my words triggered us taking on the burden of Joseph's hospital expenses. Also, due to his illness, Joseph stepped down from his position as the president. And Thomas took over as the president. Regardless, Thomas didn't like that I had spoken up. Since then, he blatantly stopped coming home. Even when discussing Richard's future plans. Thomas ignored my calls and didn't return home.
Dad's not coming home again today.
I'm sorry, Richard. I'm causing you trouble.
It's okay, I don't care about Dad. But I want to go to a university in Boston.
That's right.
Don't worry about the tuition, I'll manage it somehow.
Soon after, Richard's enrollment in a Boston university was confirmed. Naturally, Thomas didn't see Richard off. Once Richard moved to Boston, the house suddenly became quiet. By then, Thomas was only coming home about once a week.
There's also Joseph's hospital fees. Could you transfer a bit more?
Huh?
I've already transferred over half of my salary. It should be enough for you alone.
The amount Thomas transferred was just a little money. Clearly, it was only a fraction of his salary. Saying over half was definitely a lie. I knew that. But I didn't have the energy to complain. Years passed, and I received news that Richard had found a job. Richard has got a job now. It's probably a good time to talk about divorce. In these years, I had prepared for the divorce. It was just a matter of timing. When and where should I say it to avoid any trouble? Such thoughts constantly occupied my mind. It's not even about not wanting to cause a scene. I laughed at myself sarcastically. Then one day, I had been to visit Joseph. After chatting with Joseph as usual, I returned home. Reaching the entrance, I was startled. For some reason, the front door was unlocked. Could it be a burglar? Tentatively, I peeked inside the house. Then I heard the sound of the TV and Thomas's laughter coming from the living room. So Thomas was home. Relieved, I entered the living room. There, Thomas was watching TV, laughing loudly.
You were home.
Yeah, I thought I'd tidy up the house a bit.
Tidy up?
His words made me look around. On closer inspection, some items in the room were missing.
Wait, it looks like some things are missing.
Yeah, I threw them out.
Your stuff.
Threw out?
My things?
Shocked, I hurried back to my room. The room was empty. No computer, no TV, not even my favorite cup. Even the bed was gone.
What's the meaning of this? I don't need them anymore, so I threw them out. Don't need them? What am I supposed to do now?
I shouted, and Thomas frowned. Then he looked away and sighed. I guess. I'm tired of supporting you.
What are you saying? I'm your wife.
I retorted, and Thomas seemed irritated. He suddenly raised his voice.
Do I have to spell it out?
Stop leeching off me, you useless thing. For over 20 years, I believed I had devoted myself to my husband, Thomas. Yet, this is what Thomas really thought of me. I wasn't leeching off him. I was merely devoted to him. But I can't put these thoughts into words. As my strength drains away, he continues.
Now that Richard is a working adult, you've got no reason to leech off me, right? But... Quiet! I don't want to hear your excuses.
He raises his voice. Oh, I can't do this anymore. My feelings will never reach him. At that moment, I hear something snap inside me. It's the sound of the thread of love that connected our hearts, breaking. At the same time, my feelings for him begin to fade. We were husband and wife until just now, but now he feels like a stranger. He had been using me from the start. He never loved me. Otherwise, he wouldn't blatantly cheat and try to kick me out. I don't care what happens to such a man. No, I must bring him down thoroughly. With my mind made up, I lift my face and stare intently at him.
What? Got a complaint?
None.
If you want me out, then I'll leave as you wish.
I slammed the living room door shut, heading to my room. But there was nothing of mine left.
Don't bother looking. I had the garbage collectors take everything away. Which company did you use? The flyer is right there.
That's the one. I picked up the collector's flyer from the floor. As I called the number, I told him.
I'll make sure you regret this.
Saying that, I left the house. Soon the call connected. I explained the situation, and they understood immediately. Apparently, they had sensed something off about his behavior. The garbage collectors had kept everything as it was when they picked it up.
I'll be there shortly.
Thank you. I thanked them politely and hung up. Afterward, I visited the collector's location. I expressed my gratitude and had them move my belongings to a newly rented storage unit. I was relieved to find my belongings safe. He shouldn't think I'll just let this go. Grinding my teeth, I called Richard. I briefly explained the situation and then said,
So, I've decided to move out, considering a divorce. Richard, prepare yourself, okay?
Oh, okay. Bye. Richard quickly ended the call. He seemed scared of me. Was I that angry? I wondered, storing my mobile phone in my bag. Then I headed to a nearby business hotel. Actually, I had already decided where to move. The reason was simple. I was planning to discuss divorce with Thomas soon. Divorce and then move there. That was my plan for starting a new life. Well, it's just a bit earlier than planned. Honestly, I wasn't in trouble. It was just moving things forward by about 2 weeks. 2 weeks in a hotel. What a waste. Can't be helped. But as a housewife, I couldn't help but think it wasteful.
Maybe I should bill him for this hotel stay? Well, whatever it is, brace yourself, Thomas.
I muttered and then started working on my post-divorce plans. About 10 days into my stay at the business hotel, Thomas called me during lunch. As soon as I answered, Thomas raised his voice.
You took my money.
What are you talking about?
Don't play dumb. It's about Dad's hospital bills. The hospital just called asking for payment.
Oh, that's what he's talking about. I sighed as I replied.
You should be the one paying, shouldn't you? I'm no longer related to this, having been kicked out. You've been receiving living expenses from me. It should have been paid from there.
Yes, that's true.
But isn't the debit card for that bank account with you now?
I retorted calmly. However, I knew there was no money in that bank account. That's why I couldn't stop laughing.
I have the debit card, but there's no money in it. That's why I'm saying you took it.
I didn't take anything.
Don't lie. Who else could use it?
Didn't he realize that he had transferred too little? I replied in disbelief.
It was just too little money from the start. If there's no money for the hospital bills, why not use your own allowance? Allowance.
He started to panic, visibly confused. It seemed he thought I was unaware. Since the beginning of our marriage, he had been giving me handwritten salary statements. It was to hide the fact that he was siphoning off a portion of his salary. In other words, the skimmed money was his allowance.
I once asked Joseph about your salary. How much is Thomas earning? So, that's. He looked puzzled but told me. So, I knew about the skimmed money.
As I told him, he fell silent. There was a long silence, making me wonder if the call had dropped. Then suddenly, he raised his voice.
What's wrong with using the money I earned? It's your fault for using up the money I gave you.
Okay. So?
We're getting divorced. I'm going to demand compensation. You'll pay back the money you spent.
At that, I sneered. Perfect timing, I had evidence. Now Thomas couldn't escape the truth. I responded with a smile.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to get divorced too. Come to my place for the divorce discussion. What? No, but. You want to divorce, right? I've prepared evidence of your affair and am waiting.
Though I couldn't see him, his voice sounded strained.
Evidence of an affair? What are you talking about?
No use pretending.
I have the evidence photos. Evidence photos?
I could almost see him getting pale. Suppressing my laughter, I continued.
Then, I'll give you the address. Let's meet next Sunday to discuss in detail.
I gave him the address of a certain location and quickly ended the call. I had successfully set up the divorce confrontation. Now, if only I could make him apologize. Honestly, that would be the trickiest part. I steeled myself for the upcoming meeting. On the promised Sunday. I was already at the meeting place before the scheduled time. I wondered when he would arrive. Looking around, I spotted Thomas in the corner of my eye.
Over here!
I waved and called out. He looked up, surprised. Here?
Yes. Didn't I give you the address? But, this place, whose mansion is it?
Thomas looked behind me. There stood a mansion worth about $1 million. Much larger than a normal house, with a garden. A 3-story building with a basement and a theater room. Luxury cars parked in the built-in garage. Pointing at the mansion, I said with a smile.
This is my house. It's newly built, so it's beautiful, right? Your house? Yes. I thought I'd live here after the divorce, so I started building it a while ago.
Yes, the place I had called him to was my newly built house. Thomas, thinking of me as just a housewife, was understandably shocked. Pushing him from the back, I led him into the house. I guided him to the living room.
Let's start our discussion. This is my lawyer.
I introduced my waiting lawyer. But Thomas was too distracted. Restless, his gaze never settled. He kept looking around, not even trying to see the evidence photos of his affair on the table. Also, he didn't respond when spoken to. Frankly, the discussion was unproductive. Eventually, he asked in a quiet mutter.
How did you afford this house?
While thinking, is that what you're curious about? I answered. I just bought it, normally.
Liar! A housewife can't afford to buy a house.
It's said that to buy a $1 million house, one needs an income of around $150,000 per year. But I have that kind of income. So, I answered calmly.
I earn that much.
Do you have a problem with that?
No, but how? I started helping out at a friend's company, and before I knew it, things turned out like this.
The story goes back a few years. when I decided to divorce during my father's hospitalization turmoil. I started preparing for it. The first thing I did was look for a job. I wouldn't be able to live without a job after the divorce. So, I searched for a job to sustain myself. But good jobs aren't easy to find. That's when I consulted my close friend Linda. "Why don't you help me out with my work?" "What kind of work do you do?" "Aquaculture on land." Land-based aquaculture involves artificially creating facilities like pools for farming. There are downsides, of course, but it prevents ocean pollution. It's an eco-friendly type of farming. Linda's father started it, and now Linda had taken over. "So, you had been working there?" Thomas asked tentatively. "After I started helping, the business began to thrive. I was mainly involved in negotiations and administrative work. Linda was grateful for my help, and eventually, I was promoted to an executive position. It was all coincidental, but I believe luck is part of one's capabilities." Hearing my story, he looked dejected. Then, after a moment of thought, he suddenly looked up. "Okay. Let's pretend this divorce talk never happened. How about we start over?" As he spoke nonsense, I coldly replied, "Are you crazy?" "No, I genuinely want to start over with you," Thomas pleaded fervently. But seeing that he was only dazzled by my money, I retorted with a raised eyebrow. "I refuse to be with someone who cheats. And someone who neglects Joseph. No, about my father." "Enough. You don't know, but I was the one paying for Joseph's hospital bills." The money Thomas gave me was really just a little. After paying for food, utilities, and other expenses, there was usually nothing left, sometimes not even enough. He only gave me that much. Obviously, there was no way to pay Joseph's hospital bills with it. At first, I managed somehow, but later I paid them with my salary. "And yet, you never listened to me or visited Joseph." "Well, that's because I can't trust someone like that." I raised my voice, and he fell silent. Then, the lawyer discussed the compensation. Thomas couldn't say anything. He just kept his head down until the end. Eventually, prompted by the lawyer, Thomas signed the divorce papers. The compensation was set at $30,000. "So, now that the divorce is settled, you'll pay Joseph's hospital bills." "Ah." Thomas nodded reluctantly. At least he didn't argue. I felt relieved. Finally, I sent him away, as if chasing him out. It's over at last. The only regret was that he never apologized. But I had one last card to play. If I played it, he would apologize. Thinking that, a smile crept onto my face. A few days later, after leaving the company, someone called out to me from behind. "Hey, Elizabeth!" Turning around, I saw Thomas standing there. "Don't address me so familiarly. We're divorced." "Shut up! What did you do?" He looked at me with an angry, red face. His reaction told me everything. Ah, he must have heard that news at the company. I smiled and responded. "What do you think I did?" "Don't joke around. Tell me how you got me fired." He stomped his foot. His frustration amused me, and a smile escaped. "Isn't it your own fault? Getting punished for having an affair with the office clerk?" His affair partner was a clerk at his company. Apparently, he did whatever he wanted because he was the president. After deciding to divorce, I reported the matter to Joseph. While Joseph regretted our divorce, he was furious about Thomas's actions. When I showed him the affair evidence photos, Joseph became even more angry. Then he said to me, "I want to transfer all my company shares to you." "To me? What about Thomas's brother?" "No, to you. Use them to dethrone Thomas from his position as president." That was Joseph's plan. His company is a corporation. For a president or any executive appointment, a shareholders' meeting resolution is necessary. Of course, it can also be decided by a board of directors resolution. However, Joseph's company isn't very large. He holds most of the issued shares. This means that as a shareholder, he could make decisions alone. But it's common for small company presidents to hold the majority of shares. If I inherited all of Joseph's shares, I could exercise the voting rights alone. Nevertheless, Thomas's dismissal wasn't my decision. I informed James about acquiring the shares, and only reported Thomas's affair. The rest was up to James' judgment. James was considerate. James, why would he do whatever you say? It's not about following my orders. It's about doing what's best for the company. As I said this, Thomas collapsed on the spot. Then, he began to mutter apologies.
I was wrong. I'm sorry, please forgive me.
I won't.
If things stay this way, I'll have no job and be left destitute.
That's not my concern. It's all his responsibility. I won't forgive you even if you apologize.
Please! Forgive me! I'm begging you!
He apologized profoundly right there. I turned my back. Sorry, but there's nothing I can do. Why not? If you own the shares. I sold them to James and his wife. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. At that moment, I heard his sobbing. Of course, I pretended not to hear and walked away. After his dismissal as president, Thomas had to leave the company. He might have stayed if he had been an employee or a working director. But Thomas was arrogant, having joined the company through Joseph's referral. I refused to be an employee. He even said that. So, when he was dismissed, he was kicked out immediately. Now he's working a part-time job at a grocery store, but re-employment at his age is difficult. He's likely to spend his old age in regret and without money. As for me, being divorced allowed me to focus more on my work. There's no talk of remarriage, but I have a few male colleagues. Spring might come again for me. I was thinking about this when Richard called. I'll bring my girlfriend over sometime. That's great. I'm looking forward to it. I failed in marriage, but I don't want Richard to. But I'm sure he'll be fine. Richard is much more sensible than me.
After deciding to marry my boyfriend Ethan and visiting his family's home to greet them on the day, I found myself being rejected by all his relatives who said, "Don't ever contact us again. We don't want to hear your voice." Perhaps because of their upbringing, being doted on for their good looks, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were harsh and jealous towards anyone who possessed something they did not. Unfortunately, I became the target of their envy. Both my father-in-law and brother-in-law, without any resistance, joined them in rejecting me. Several months ago, I was able to exact a grand revenge on these four. My name is Amy. I am 27 years old. Now I'm living peaceful and happy days surrounded by love with my husband, adorable child, and my parents. The origin of all this started 3 years ago when I was 24. It was triggered when my boyfriend at the time, Ethan, proposed to me. Ethan and I were colleagues at work, and we became close due to our shared hobby of movie watching, and we started dating after many movie outings together on our off days. Ethan had a calm temperament and was friendly to everyone at work, making him well liked by many. He disliked disputes and was the kind of kind-hearted person who could forgive others' mistakes. Since the time I entered the company, I was interested in Ethan, so when he asked me out, I was overjoyed, and I looked forward to going to work every day. Whenever I made a mistake at work and was feeling down, he would listen to me all night long, and I naturally started thinking, I want to be with this person forever. Ethan had dreams of starting his own business in the future, and I wanted to be by his side to support him all the way. When Ethan proposed to me, I was over the moon. Of course, there was no reason to reject him. I accepted his proposal immediately and decided to marry Ethan. On the weekend after Ethan proposed to me, we immediately went to my family's home, introduced Ethan to my parents, and announced our intentions to marry. Ethan was also kind to my parents, and he even had a great time drinking and getting along with my father. My parents seemed to take a liking to Ethan, and they joyfully agreed to our marriage and shared in our happiness. Seeing Ethan engaging happily in conversation with my parents, I sincerely felt fortunate to have met him. The weekend following the report to my parents, we were scheduled to visit Ethan's house. Having decided to go greet them, I realized that I hadn't heard much about Ethan's family from him. But at the time, I didn't think much of it, considering that Ethan was living alone and probably didn't keep in touch with his parents that much. The night before the day we were to visit Ethan's family, Ethan suddenly said during our phone conversation, "About tomorrow. My parents might be a bit odd, but don't worry about it too much." I was slightly concerned about what he meant by odd, but I figured I would find out the next day, and since we had to wake up early the next day, I decided not to worry about it too much and went to sleep. Around 10 a.m. the next day, I met up with Ethan at the station and we headed towards his house together. Since Ethan was living alone, this was my first time visiting his family home. Despite what I might say, I was nervous all morning, and when I was walking with Ethan, I hardly heard what he was saying because my heart was pounding so fast. What stood there was a grand mansion, like a castle. The garden was vast, and I was petrified when I thought, Ethan grew up here? My nerves eased a little when Ethan, with his usual gentle smile, said, "Are you nervous? It's okay, let's go." As soon as the front door opened, my mother-in-law was there to greet me. "Oh my, you've come all this way? You must be tired. Come on in quickly." She greeted me kindly. She was very slender, well made up, and her hair was beautifully arranged. Her expensive, wrinkle-free clothes were flawless. Once inside, my father-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and their children were waiting. Everyone in the family other than my mother-in-law greeted me with smiles, which was a relief. I was warmly welcomed, took a seat on the sofa, had dinner while chatting with everyone, and announced our engagement. Ethan's family was very pleased, especially my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were excited, saying, "We're so happy to have such a cute girl join our family." I was moved by the warm welcome from these people. The pleasant conversation continued. Ethan's family were very talkative, and according to the stories that came up, my father-in-law ran a company that sold package tours, and my brother-in-law who lived with them was working there as an executive director, intending to take over the company in the future. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were housewives, supporting their husbands' lives, and they were living gracefully, attending dance classes and flower arrangement lessons during the day. My sister-in-law also took care of her appearance, and she exuded a confident atmosphere. My father-in-law was very kind, always smiling at me and making me feel at ease by bringing up various topics so that I wouldn't be nervous. I was sincerely glad he seemed like a good person. At that moment, a certain conversation with my father-in-law broke the harmonious atmosphere. "Amy, I heard that you work at the same company as Ethan. Are you a contract employee there?" "No, I originally joined the company as a regular employee after graduating from university, just like Ethan." The company where Ethan and I work is a major corporation, known to the public as a top-tier company. It's a popular company among job seekers, and getting hired as a regular employee is challenging. But luckily, I was hired as a new graduate after college. "Oh, is that so? Huh. In that case, where did you graduate from?" "I graduated from Harvard." "That's amazing. You must be really talented. I'm so proud that someone as talented as you is marrying into our family." "Amy's awesome, isn't she? She is very hardworking. She's competent at work and quick-witted. I'm so happy to be marrying her." My father-in-law and Ethan praised me so much it was embarrassing. In fact, I went to a top-tier university in the US, and I studied hard during my high school years, even at the expense of my sleep. My parents, who didn't have much money, worked hard to get me through college. I was determined to attend a good college, land a decent job, and someday definitely give back to my parents. I've been striving towards that with all my heart. Caught up in a lively conversation with the two others, I noticed that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had gone quiet. I thought, "Oh no," and I desperately sought a change in the conversation. And noticing a beautiful arrangement of fresh flowers on the table before me, I asked, "Mother-in-law, that flower arrangement is lovely. Did you put it together?" To which she responded somewhat gruffly, "What? As if you, a professional working in a top-tier company, have any interest in housewives' time-killing activities." Confused, I wondered why her demeanor had changed when just a moment ago she was speaking with a smile. As if in agreement with my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law chimed in saying, "From your point of view, Amy, with your high education, you probably think all us uneducated housewives can talk about is flowers." I hadn't meant it that way at all. Not knowing what to say, I felt a lump in my throat, nearly bringing me to tears. Ethan quickly interjected, "Hey, both of you, stop that. Amy isn't the type to look down on people." Ethan's words were a comfort, but I couldn't bring myself to apologize or say anything, so I just kept my head down. Glancing around, I noticed my father-in-law, who had been drinking since noon, snoring and passed out on the sofa. My brother-in-law was clearly bored, yawning and scrolling through his phone, making the atmosphere in the room really tense. Then, at Ethan's suggestion, maybe it's about time we wrap this up, I was finally released from my uncomfortable atmosphere. On our way back to the station, Ethan apologized. Sorry about today. My mom and sister have a high pride. They're particularly sensitive about their high school graduate. From what Ethan told me later, my mother-in-law had been working at a flower shop right after high school, where my father-in-law had spotted her and fallen in love at first sight. My mother-in-law was certainly a beautiful woman. She had many customers coming into the flower shop just to see her. Every day, my father-in-law would frequent the flower shop, and after a relentless pursuit, they started dating and eventually got married. Even now, it seems my father-in-law is always wrapped around my mother-in-law's little finger, always doing as she says. My sister-in-law was also a beautiful woman. She and my brother-in-law were high school classmates and had reconnected at reunion in their early 20s. Upon seeing how beautiful she had become, my brother-in-law fell head over heels, and after he persisted wooing, they ended up together. My brother-in-law too seems to do whatever his wife tells him to. Sure, I have a high level of education, but I couldn't understand why they felt insecure. They were both beautiful women who had kind husbands who would always protect them. I ended the day feeling unresolved and a little gloomy. A part of me started to question, is this marriage going to be all right? Leaving me with lingering discomfort. In any case, we received approval for our marriage from both families, so we started to plan our wedding. Even though the unease hadn't entirely disappeared, I felt that we would understand each other better if we talked more. Don't worry, I'll always be on your side, Amy. I was able to stay positive. After nearly 6 months of lengthy preparation and with the final push at hand, it was finally the day before our wedding when Ethan's cell phone rang. It was from his mother. After having a brief conversation over the phone, Ethan let out a surprised shout. What? Why? Huh? We can't just change it. Hey, hold on. It seemed like the call had been cut off. When I asked what happened, Ethan shocked me with what he said. My parents, they said they're not coming to the wedding tomorrow. What? What do you mean? I was completely unable to digest the situation and anxiously asked Ethan. According to Ethan, it seemed that the in-laws had forgotten that they had booked a trip for the next day and couldn't attend the wedding. Unbelievable. The parents of my husband are skipping the wedding on the day before the ceremony? We stood there in a daze for a while. Not understanding why this happened, we tried calling not only the mother-in-law, but also the father-in-law and brother-in-law many times to get an explanation, but only the dial tone continued to ring and no one picked up the phone. Confused by the sudden situation, we quickly went to the in-laws' house, but the lights were off and there were no cars, indicating that nobody was home. I said to Ethan, when I went to greet your family the other day, I wondered if I upset your mother and sister. The atmosphere was quite tense at the end, to which Ethan responded, as I've said before, both my mother and sister have high pride. Smart women tend to be a bit hard-headed. Even if they hold a grudge for such a thing, I wouldn't know. When I asked, but why would your father also skip the wedding? Ethan replied, my dad and brother-in-law, they're both very submissive to their wives. They probably sided with them to not upset my mother and sister. Ethan said this with a distressed look. I was at a loss for words. In the end, we were unable to contact Ethan's family even on the day of the wedding, so we had no choice but to go ahead with the wedding without Ethan's family present. Why did this happen? Did I do something wrong? And was it really true that they forgot they were going on a hot springs trip? Even if it were true, I couldn't comprehend why Ethan's family would choose a trip over attending their own son's wedding. My parents who had arrived at the wedding venue were very surprised when they heard that Ethan's family would not be attending. Ethan said to my parents, I'm very sorry for the trouble my parents have caused. My parents responded, it's not your fault, Ethan. Don't worry about it. Enjoy the wedding. But their expressions were a bit complicated. I felt terrible for making my parents have such expressions at the wedding. During the reception, we could hear whispers among Ethan's friends and mine asking, why aren't Ethan's parents here? And the boss from work who kindly agreed to give a toast also asked, what happened to your parents? Leaving us wondering how to answer. He couldn't possibly say, my parents are at a trip instead of attending their son's wedding. When we were asked about Ethan's parents that day, we brushed it off saying they were feeling unwell. What was supposed to be a joyous day turned out to be one mentally exhausting day. Several days after the wedding ceremony, Ethan and I went to his parents' house to report that the ceremony had ended. Oh, Amy, it's been a while. How was the wedding? Did you have fun? Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't make it because of my trip that day. I meant to buy you a souvenir, but I got so busy and forgot. She said this with no signs of remorse. No, it's okay. I'm glad you enjoyed your trip. Inside, I felt sadness, wondering why I had to suffer such treatment. But to avoid worsening our relationship with Ethan's family, I responded with a forced smile. Ethan said, "It's unacceptable to cancel the day before. A wedding where all the relatives are absent? Is that even normal? If you didn't want to attend, we shouldn't have invited you in the first place." Then the sister-in-law said, "I would have attended if Amy wasn't the bride." What? What does that mean? I was so confused that my head started spinning. Then, as if to counterattack, the mother-in-law said, "Don't just blame us. I wanted to see my cute son's once-in-a-lifetime moment, but Amy ruined it. I'm a victim too. I'd like an apology." Ethan spoke up on behalf of me, who was too shocked to respond. "What do you mean Amy caused it? Amy didn't do anything." Then the father-in-law, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Enough is enough. How dare you come in here in the middle of our day off and complain? Is that all you came here for? Get out!" He yelled at us with incredible ferocity, and we were forcibly kicked out. And as I was putting on my shoes at the entrance, I felt a prick on the bottom of my foot. Ouch! In a panic, I lifted my foot and saw a caterpillar crawling inside my shoe. Ew! I, with one shoe on, ran outside and let the caterpillar go. The mother-in-law and sister-in-law, who had been watching, said, "Are you okay?" while snickering maliciously. I, who wanted to get out of there as soon as possible, said, "Sorry for the trouble," and was about to leave the house quickly when I was stopped by my mother-in-law. "Amy, please don't get involved with us except for weddings and funerals." Huh? Before I could ask why, she abruptly closed the door, ending the conversation. I really don't understand what I've done. I just wanted to get along with Ethan's family. On the way home, Ethan kept apologizing to me. He said, "You don't have to force yourself to interact with my family anymore. I'm really sorry." The mother-in-law and sister-in-law said they would have attended the wedding if I hadn't been the bride. Feeling as if I was the one who had done something wrong without even knowing why, I started to feel sorry for Ethan. The very next day, I woke up to intense itching all over my body. The itch was so unbearable that I jumped out of bed and rushed to the mirror, only to find my entire body had swollen up fiery red. I was supposed to work that day, but quickly got a sick day and went to the dermatologist. Apparently, the swelling on my entire body was due to the caterpillar stings. The caterpillar from yesterday, huh? The itching was incredibly intense, and for about 2 weeks since that day, I was unable to sleep properly due to the severe itching. Come to think of it, I noticed my brother-in-law touching my shoes at the front door when I went to Ethan's house. The old me would have thought a caterpillar had just accidentally crawled in, but at that time, I felt nothing but distrust towards my in-laws. A month after that, Ethan was hospitalized due to ill health. He had been complaining of frequent stomach pains for a week before being hospitalized, so I, who was worried, forcefully made him take a day off from work and took him to the hospital, where he was told that he probably had a gastric ulcer and needed to be hospitalized for further tests. I was told not to contact them unless it was for a wedding or a funeral, so I hesitated, but I thought that it was not something to keep secret from Ethan's parents, so I plucked up the courage and called my in-laws. "Hello?" My mother-in-law picked up the phone. While the phone was ringing, I couldn't stop my hand from shaking, and I felt nauseous the moment I heard my mother-in-law's voice. That's how much I had come to dislike my mother-in-law. "Hello, it's Amy. I'm sorry I haven't been in touch." "What is it this time?" "Well, Ethan has been hospitalized due to ill health. They think it might be a gastric ulcer, but he's being admitted for tests just in case, so I thought I should let you know." "Ah, a gastric ulcer, huh? Isn't it because you're overworking him? Please don't call me for such trivial matters. I'm busy." "Trivial matter? Don't you care about Ethan?" "I don't want to hear your voice. I'll tell you clearly because you seem dull. I don't want to have anything to do with you from now on, so please don't contact me again. I'm worried about Ethan. That's why I'll call him directly." Then my brother-in-law suddenly came on the phone. "Look, you're too persistent. Read the room a little. I don't know if Ethan's been hospitalized or what, but it's annoying to have you contact us every time." He hung up the phone unilaterally. The moment I heard the sound of the phone hanging up, I felt like something inside me had snapped. The in-laws who mercilessly threw harsh words at me, the mother-in-law who said don't contact us, even though her own son was hospitalized, and the entire family of in-laws who rejected me unilaterally, I couldn't forgive them. You don't want me to contact you again because it's a bother? I don't want to have anything to do with that strange family. I will never contact them again, no matter what happens. After that, there were no significant abnormalities in Ethan's test results, and it turned out to be a mild gastric ulcer, so he took medication for a while and his health improved significantly. Of course, I explained the whole situation to Ethan. Ethan, with a look of resolve on his face, told me, "Let's stop getting involved with my family. The only person that matters to me now is Amy. If they can't accept Amy, then even if we're connected by blood, they're not family to me." A year after that happened, Ethan finally left his job and realized his long-standing dream of starting a software sales business. He had been dreaming of starting his own business since before we got married. Of course, he leveraged his previous job experience to accomplish this. Ethan worked harder than anyone else at his job to achieve this. Although we're still at the starting point, I was happy to see even a bit of Ethan's dream becoming a reality. And our happiness continued. A year after he started his business, a healthy baby boy was born to us. My parents were overjoyed at the birth of their grandchild. Despite the nearly 2-hour journey from my house to theirs, they visited us frequently, making each day extremely blissful. Naturally, we did not report the birth of our child to Ethan's parents. Well, even if we had, they probably wouldn't have cared anyway, so it doesn't really matter. We didn't hear a thing from Ethan's parents after the phone call. Feeling relieved that we didn't have to deal with that peculiar family anymore was somewhat comforting. Then, several months later, something happened. The new coronavirus began to spread globally, and our country also declared a state of emergency and called for people to refrain from going out. Watching the news, all we saw were discussions about coronavirus. As the call for non-essential outings to be refrained grew louder, it was clear that the restaurant and tourism industries were severely affected. My heart ached for them. Suddenly, I wondered how the package tour company run by Ethan's father was doing, but it was none of my concern. No, I might have even cracked a smile imagining the state of his father's business. Despite the circumstances, Ethan's business was doing very well. While there was some instability in our income when we first started the business, recently our income has been higher than when Ethan was an employee and everything was going well. Around this time, Ethan started to receive a lot of calls from his parents' home. However, Ethan seemed to be avoiding getting involved with them, and he didn't pick up the phone even when he noticed the calls. There were also some voicemails left, but because he decided not to be involved with his family anymore, he ignored them without even listening to them. I often told Ethan, "You don't have to worry about me. It's okay to get in touch with them." From my perspective, I despise his family. But for Ethan, they're his family who raised him, and I felt guilty making him cut ties with his parents because of me. However, Ethan told me, "As I've said before, Amy is the most important person to me, not my parents. If they can't accept Amy, even if they are my parents, I can't value them." I felt sorry, but also happy for Ethan's unwavering kindness. Ethan was still receiving calls from his father and mother every day, all of which he ignored. Then one day, a letter arrived from Ethan's family home. The letter simply stated, "Our business is on the verge of bankruptcy and we have some financial matters we'd like to discuss. We need to talk as soon as possible." Pretty audacious for someone who had cut ties with us. Their nerve was just as strong as ever, and they demanded urgent contact. Of course we didn't get in touch. Let him suffer. That's what he deserves. Next thing I knew, my cell phone was ringing. I didn't notice the call as I was at work, but a voicemail was kindly left for me. It seemed like Ethan had not been answering his phone. So, the caller had reluctantly reached out to me instead. It's quite audacious, especially when I had told them not to contact me. Reluctantly, I decided to listen to the message that was left on my voicemail. All I got was a message saying, "Is this Amy's number? If Ethan continues to ignore me, I'll come knocking. Let him know." That's all it said. 2 days after the voicemail was left, Ethan had the day off because it was Saturday. We were enjoying a leisure family day at home. We had just finished lunch and were discussing what to do for the rest of the day when the doorbell rang. When I checked the monitor, there stood my 4 in-laws. Seeing my shocked face, Ethan came over to check the monitor as well. Ethan let out a heavy sigh and said to me, "You don't have to answer. They'll give up and leave if we don't open the door." However, I said, "It's fine. They've come all this way, so we should let them in. It's kind of pitiful." Ethan thought for a moment, then said, "Okay," and unlocked the door. Pitiful? No way would I ever feel that way about such diabolical in-laws. I purposely didn't tell Ethan about the voicemail. All of this was to lure them into our home. Of course, my shock at seeing them through the monitor was just an act. I knew they would show up sooner or later. There was a reason why I let Ethan's parents into our house. The real retaliation is yet to come. It's time for a full-scale confrontation. The entire in-law family had come to our front door. As soon as the door was opened and the four of them marched in without a hint of restraint, spoke in a frustrated tone, "How long does it take to just open the door? Such a bunch of ill-mannered people, it's unbelievable." As soon as they entered the house, Ethan's mother saw our son happily playing with his toys on the floor and said, "Whose child is this?" I responded, "He's our son." "Ah, I remember now. You said not to contact you anymore, so I didn't report it. But I don't think you're interested anyway, so whether or not I report it makes no difference." Upon hearing this, Ethan's mother stared at me with a look of contempt and muttered under her breath, "You are so cheeky." I was starting to enjoy the situation and asked Ethan's father, "So what brings you here today? If you wanted to visit, you should have let us know in advance." Ethan's father responded, "Didn't you read the letter?" "Do you mean the one that arrived 2 days ago?" I said, to which Ethan's father angrily said, "If you read it, you should have contacted us. It said we needed to hear from you urgently." Quick to respond, I said, "Oh, you wanted me to contact you? But you said you didn't want to have anything to do with us anymore, so I didn't think it was necessary." Looking at the stern faces of the four, it was hard for me to suppress my laughter. Ethan, my husband, remained silent as if letting me say everything I wanted. True to form, he knew how to read the room. It's hard to believe he was born to parents who lacked such common sense. Then my father-in-law abruptly changed his attitude and began pleading. "I beg you, I apologize for the past. Due to this COVID situation, everyone's been canceling their travel reservations one after another. We're not getting any new bookings either, and who knows how long this situation will continue. If things go on this long, my business will be ruined, so can't you help me out with some money?" I responded, "I see, that's tough, but no. I'm afraid I have to decline. I don't want to conveniently assist someone who said they wanted nothing to do with me anymore. However, if you're really desperate, if you show me sincerity, I might reconsider." My father-in-law shouted, "What the hell?" and started to intimidate me with a furious face. But I wasn't scared anymore. I decided to handle things my way. "I didn't say you had to. Feel free to leave if you want to." My father-in-law looked vexed, slowly started begging. "I'm sorry, please help me out," he pleaded. Seeing that, I didn't respond. He told the other three to also apologize to me, and finally, all four of them started begging. When I responded, "No thank you," with a smile, my father-in-law suddenly got angry and banged his hand on the table. He then shouted, "You! When I'm humbling myself, you're getting high and mighty," and grabbed my collar. Surprised by his sudden aggression, I was about to tell him to stop when Ethan said, "Hey, Dad, don't lay a hand on Amy." My father-in-law asked, "You're going to take your wife's side when your parents are begging like this?" Ethan replied, "The most important person to me right now is Amy. I can't care about someone who treats Amy poorly, even if they're my parents. And I don't need any superficial apologies just for money. If you can't apologize to Amy from the bottom of your heart, just leave." At this, my father-in-law, seemingly enraged, punched Ethan square in the face. "Is that how you talk to your parents?" Blood was coming out of Ethan's mouth from the punch. I tried to say something to my father-in-law, but he was still so angry. He started to kick Ethan, who was on the ground. I yelled, "What are you doing to Ethan?" and tried to hold my father-in-law from behind, but he shrugged me off and I was thrown back, hitting my head on the corner of the table. I touched the back of my head where I hit it. My hand came back covered in blood. The other three people, excluding my father-in-law, looked shocked and frozen in place. As my father-in-law started ransacking the room shouting, "Where's the money?" I quickly opened the balcony window and yelled to the people passing by, "Help! I'm being murdered!" 5 minutes later, the police arrived. When the police arrived, my father-in-law quickly calmed down and began to blather, "Sorry for the commotion. I just got carried away with the excitement of seeing my grandson. My daughter-in-law seems drunk or something. She's been shouting strange things," he started with a flippant smile. I explained to the officer, "Please take this man away. He hit both my husband and me. He's also been ransacking our house, demanding cash." Suddenly, father-in-law shouted, "I didn't do anything!" and with a curse, he punched a hole in the wall. He was arrested on the spot. The other three of them were also taken to the station for questioning. Afterwards, it seems that father-in-law was held in jail for a while. Ethan, my husband, had been punched in the cheek, but fortunately, it was just a light cut and bruise that healed quickly. On the other hand, the wound on the back of my head turned out to be bigger than I thought, and I ended up getting 10 stitches. I feel guilty for causing Ethan to get hurt as a result of luring my in-laws to our house for my revenge, but I'm glad that they have stopped asking for money, seemingly regretting their actions. From what I heard later, as I expected when they first met me, father-in-law praised me and both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law became jealous. The two of them apparently instructed father-in-law and my brother-in-law to act coldly towards me. Of course, neither father-in-law nor my brother-in-law could stand up to them and were merely doing as told. The caterpillar that ended up in my shoe was likely the work of my brother-in-law, egged on by my sister-in-law. Jealousy is indeed frightening. It's unbelievable how much it can change someone's life. You never know what might happen. Afterwards, as expected, my in-laws had no way of getting their hands on money. Their business went bankrupt. And their house was seized. Now it seems they live in a cheap apartment. Both my father-in-law and my mother-in-law are nearing 70. It's difficult for them to find work again. My brother-in-law had been working at father-in-law's company, but taking advantage of being the boss's son, he didn't work seriously and seemed to spend all day at the casino. Approaching 50 with no useful skills, it's hard for my brother-in-law to find a job, and it seems he's now making a living with a part-time job at a convenience store. My sister-in-law had been a stay-at-home wife with no significant career, and she seemed to be job hunting at employment agencies and the like. However, due to her selfish personality, she kept complaining about this and that and couldn't hold a part-time job down for long. Now she seems to be cooped up at home. A little after that incident, my father retired and we decided to live together with my parents. The person who proposed living together was none other than Ethan. It was because I am an only child and he was concerned about my parents' life in their old age. I've returned to work now, and my parents take care of our son during the day, so I feel secure balancing childcare and work. Ethan, my beloved husband, and my kind parents. And of course, my son, who is my treasure. Life with them is the happiest. I resolve never to forget to be grateful for this happiness.